And this is the after party. Your hosts are the Great Order and No White Guilt. As for the crown winner of last week, the crown goes to our very own Evidence Violates TOS for financially gifting 30 Save Those White Baby Dollars. Thank you so very much, and congratulations, good sir. In second place was another one of our very own Mrs. Jess Horst, who's been in the top two so many times it is beyond count. She financially gifted $15. Thank you so very much, sweet woman. And congratulations as well. You may financially gift on Entropy at 15%, and that's Entropy at No White Guilt, where you can also watch the stream and ask and vote on questions. If I decide, I will put up a poll, but we shall see. And you can also financially gift on Cash App, both of which are in the description below. Now today, if you can believe it or not, we have the Great Order on tap. A first time. Well, no, that's not, because very early on, I'll just correct myself. Very early on, I was interviewing Jared George at the very beginning of our collaboration. So now we have returned. We're going to be interviewing Jared as the Great Order, discussing his musical debut and his first piece, Someone to Know. Welcome to you, Mr. George, and how are you doing today?
Hello. Yeah, I guess this is how we started, coming full circle, huh?
Yes, it is. Well, let me first say to you, because we haven't had an opportunity to speak before the show today, and that is that every comment, we wouldn't be talking about this anyhow over the course of this show, and make sure, folks, that you share the URL, because we are going to be talking, as I said, with the Great Order here about all things relative to his music, and it's going to be very exciting. But just so you know, Jared, that YouTube has made it publicly known that any comment about the election that contradicts the anti-white narrative, that we now have a President Joe Biden, is an instant deletion of the channel. And they bragged about how many channels they have deleted as a consequence. So we will not be speaking about the election ever again, except to say how happy we are.
Well, yes.
And whatever YouTube wants us to be happy about, and how much we endorse whatever that they want us to endorse. But otherwise, there are going to be some new people, and it does seem strange that we go this direction. But nonetheless, we have to, because there are going to be new people, perhaps some new ones live. We've had some new people showing up, actually, Jared, quite a bit.
Yeah,
to some of the other streams, and there are going to be some new folks watching in replay. So who is Jared George? Who is the Great Order, and where can they find you? And then we're going to begin to dig into this talent that you have hidden from us, this great light that you have kept behind a bushel, and now we finally get to see. So please, sir, the floor is yours.
Well, we have enough new people where it makes sense for me to introduce myself. Aside from just saying my site is thegreatorder.com. Does anyone need any backstory?
Well, I no, it doesn't need it, but I mean, saying that will certainly help new folks find you and where they can find your material.
Yeah, Jason and I have been doing this show for 2.5 years now. We are going to celebrate our 3-year anniversary in a few months in February. Essentially, I started a site about 3 years ago, and I do live streams, different kinds of media videos. I've made short cultural videos for Red Ice, wrote poetry articles, done specialty projects like put together Last Message to the West contest last year with Australia's Lovely Porridge. It was the first video contest of its kind, asking content creators if they had one last message to the West to explain what our perspective is, but they knew it would be seen everywhere before they were censored. What would it be? I recently helped put together the folk coffee table book. I helped organize that. I have a piece in there. Jason has a piece in there also. That book was about asking certain well-known content creators and activists from around the Western world, Australia, different parts of Europe, Canada, the US, what it means to be a people. And we got Ricardo Duchesne to write the foreword. Tony at White People's Press put together a beautiful layout with old paintings. So all kinds of specialty projects, all sorts of things. As I said, on thegreatorder.com, that's a catalog of everything I've done. You can see the categories, browse the menu, and see the whole history there. But yeah, Jason's right. My main passion and focus is actually music. And funny enough, for a few different reasons, it just wasn't the right time to put it out until recently and have it be part of this Great Order banner that I do, this social media handle. But now it'll function also as a band name of sorts, because even though it's essentially just me, you may know that certain artists, instead of going by their name as an artist, so what's on singles and albums and all that, they use what sounds more like a band name. So I decided to use The Great Order as the artist name as well. So people call me Jared. Everyone knows my name when we do interviews and I'm on streams, but the artist name is The Great Order. So that's what you'll see. There's a new music page, and the song we're going to talk about today is available everywhere, all the major stores and platforms. Download it, stream it, share it. And it's all like this economic model is today. It's all based on just, if we make things that you find enough value in and we have a good enough reputation, then you pay what you think it's worth. So there are ways to support there at the bottom of the music page. So I know we're going to get now under the hood, and Jason has some great questions. And we're very interested, too, to hear people from the chat. So usually this is an interview show for anyone that's new. Jason and I like to pick the brains of all kinds of different content creators from around the world and activists. But every so often we do a show, just the two of us. Sometimes we just like to check in with the chat. But Jason generously, because of the occasion of my song coming out very recently, this debut song, because I'm just releasing one song at a time. It's kind of on a rolling schedule. Jason said, hey, I want to interview you. I've had the pleasure of interviewing Jason a few times about his books, about his writing, trying to understand his creative process. Those were fascinating discussions. So whether or not you are a creative yourself and write or make music or paint or make films, hopefully there's still something here for you where it'll be something of interest, get to know what makes us tick a little bit more, might make you think about new things or inspire you to do something or share it with someone. So that's what we're doing today.
Precisely. And actually, you've already answered one of the questions. I mean, I shared with you some of the more evocative questions, but there were some lightweight questions that I wanted to ask. And I think you already touched upon one of them, and that is that when did the Great Order become the band name? When, I guess if you have anything you wanted to add to what you already said, because it didn't start off as the band name, it became the band name, and how and when roughly did that happen?
Well, the Great Order banner, when I launched in late 2017, as I mentioned about 3 years ago, just as a media handle and the name of a website, I knew that it was an umbrella for all these different communications and creative projects that I did. And I knew that down the road, basically when I started releasing music, and I was known as the Jared George from the Great Order, I'd have a choice of either Jared George or the Great Order to be the music, the quote unquote band name or the artist name. I didn't want to throw in a third thing. I thought that would be too convoluted. The choice to actually whether it was going to be Jared George or the Great Order was kind of a game time decision. It was literally a few days before I was doing it and setting up the website, and it just it seemed to be more in that direction. And even though I do most of it, I am mostly inspired by, I know we'll talk about this too, all kinds of music, all kinds of artists, but primarily bands. I listen to bands. I like full production, the whole thing, drums, guitar, bass, like a band playing together. So it kind of goes with that too. It just seemed to make sense. It was intuitive, but yeah, it was within the week of that launch. The song, for anyone that doesn't know, came out the day before American Thanksgiving. It's actually exactly 2 weeks ago. It was a Wednesday. So it was exactly 2 weeks ago tonight that actually it's 6 o'clock Eastern right about now. I did a premiere on YouTube. I did a site reveal. So it is exactly almost to the minute, 2 weeks old, song release, the first song called Someone to Know.
Which is a fantastic piece, folks. And I would have had it playing when we got started. But the last time I had it playing, Jared was like, this is my song again. How many times are we going to play my song? And it doesn't necessarily come through with the right tone and sound as it was made when it goes back through this software. So hopefully they'll be able to fix that and it'll sound perfect in the future. But I want to, I want to repeat for folks, if you have any questions for the Great Order today, make sure you tag.
Still call me Jared when we're talking.
No, I got you. But tag me, Discipline with NWG on that channel, No White Guilt on the No White Guilt channel. And of course, on Entropy, we have the question widget, and you can financially gift. And those who financially gift will receive priority, but we'll get to everybody's questions. What I would like to do is I want to jump back in time a bit and go to, and this is, again, a little bit more of a lightweight question before we get into some of the more evocative stuff. We'll kind of jump back in time a little bit. And when did Jared George become interested in music? And what age? And what were those initial sort of incipient ideas and emotions relative to music? Was it straight into the I want to be a rocker, or was it I'm just interested in a type of music, and I'm really pulled to it, and then it developed from there? How did you first get started? And I'll go ahead and just tack on to that question. Your first interest in music. What was your first instrument that you began to play, that you began to learn on? Whether or not it ended up being the instrument that you rock out on today, what was that very first instrument that spoke to you and said, Jared, come over here and pick me up?
Oh, for me, it was guitar. And so it's still my main instrument. Absolutely, guitar. So there's never been a time when music wasn't in my life. It literally, some of my earliest memories when I was probably 2.5 or 3 years old, was being on the floor with my dad and his vinyl out and listening to records. He's a music lover and worked a little bit in music as well, and passed that on to me. So sometimes kids develop a taste in music a little later, maybe when they get to be 10, 11, 12, and they're getting closer to or into pubescent years. And then instead of just not having much of an interest in music or just being ambivalent to it and listening to what's around, they start to find their tastes and they start to seek things out. That wasn't the case with me. I was tuned in, pardon the pun, to music. I didn't plan that. I was tuned into music from the get-go. I remember being like 5 years old and being at the store and asking my mom for records and looking for things. So it was always there. But even with guitar, even before I started playing it, just the feel of it, I guess the feel of it in your hands, the stance of it was there with me, because there are literally pictures of me when I was, again, 3, 4 years old with like a toy guitar or a balloon guitar. So it was always kind of there. And when I was 9 years old, my parents knew I had an interest in music. And as I said, they were both music lovers themselves. There's a lot of music played around the house. Excuse me. So they figured they would offer me lessons, to expose me and see if it's something I took to. And basically the choice was guitar or piano. And I remember thinking about it a little bit, but naturally, with what I told you and already the music that I was drawn to was more rock-based music, the choice was guitar. And they did something good with this too. So I did take some lessons with a woman for a couple of years, and then I stopped for a little bit. And then maybe when I was 12 or maybe just into 13, I started taking some lessons again, but this time with like a younger guy, and it was a little more appropriate for that age. I'd already been playing for a few years. He was very well versed in music theory, and I don't know, actually still to this day, I don't know music theory. I don't know how to read music, but it was mainly, he was rock music, and we'd figure things out that I liked. rock is an interesting thing because it's kind of, I consider it a folk art. So I think that I had a good mixture of learning just a little bit to get me started with that first woman when I was little. And then a couple years later with that younger guy who was more of like a rock player. Enough to get me going and get some things started, and get the right kind of techniques. But it wasn't so heavy-handed because there's a lot to rock where you put on this is how a lot of people that I look up to did it. You put on records and you figure out what they were doing. So by the time I was 13 or 14, I was doing that thing that a lot of rock guitar players do. I'd just play back again and again. How did he do this? How did he do this? How did he do this? And, playing riffs and then eventually simple solos and then more complex solos. And a lot of it is taught, or your friend's older brother shows you something. That's something that is kind of, I think, part of the rock idiom too. There are other musical idioms that demand a little more musical knowledge or a little more virtuosity. Obviously, the same couldn't really be said of, say, classical guitar, if you wanted to be a professional classical guitar player, something like that. But my interest was always in authorship too. So I'd figure things out sometimes kind of halfway, but then I'd make my own thing up too. There's always an instinct for creating, for songwriting. In fact, I've done a few streams since the songs come out, but they're all different. And I've never actually spoken about this before, to getting as deep as we're into just like the very early origins. But literally, Jason, I still remember this clearly. The very, very first time that I played an actual guitar, when my parents bought me a relatively inexpensive acoustic guitar when I was 9, and I'd said I wanted to do guitar, and then they found a woman to come to the house once a week, and I'd be starting guitar lessons soon. I remember I sat alone in my room, and it was so big. It's so, you're 9 years old. It's so big. Right. It was an actual guitar. It's a full-size guitar. I still have it. It's actually the guitar on the left in that picture that kind of has that sunburst finish that's on the way left of the screen. That's literally still my first guitar. I still have it, that acoustic there. I could get it fixed up. But I remember strumming, and I didn't know what I was doing, of course, but I immediately began to also try to start singing a song. And I can literally remember it was about nature. It was about mountains and forests, and I was trying to describe a scene. So it's incredible when you think back with your adult mind, when you see these little vignettes or memories from when you're a kid, where you just kind of see, this is something very fundamental in my life. This is something I was meant to do. So yeah, that's some of the history.
Well, that's really fascinating to me, because so you're almost like you're picking up the music. You're not reading the sheet music. You are picking it up almost like it sounds to me like, especially coming from the ignorant place that I'm coming from, it's like almost like from the ether. You're hearing the music, and then you're feeling the music, and then you're living it back through you into the instrument from such a very early age. Did it feel like, even though the guitar is quite large, did it feel almost like an extension of you when you?
I think that's a good way to put it. That is what I was trying to get at when I said earlier how there were even antecedents to this, where I was like, there are pictures of me with a little toy guitar or balloon guitar when I was a toddler. I think that's a good way to put it, Jason, with the extension, where it's like, oh, yeah, this is something that's going to be next to my body and with me a lot in my life. It just kind of fit like puzzle pieces. So yeah, absolutely. I should say that with the first woman, when I was a little kid, 9, 10 years old, and she'd come to the house, I did learn to read a little bit. So, it was basic rudimentary stuff, and she'd have me play songs along with her, and developed pretty well. I remember running into her when I was about 16 or 17 on the street, and I was actually on the way to my brother's piano recital, because he ended up taking piano lessons, but then became a drummer. He's a fantastic drummer, and the piano teacher told him how she could see that he had a great sense of rhythm, but he started out a little with piano. So I'm on my way to this piano recital, And I happened to run into her, and I was like, "Oh, I'm going to see my brother." And she was like, "Are you still playing guitar?" I was like, "Yeah." She's like, "I knew you would." Like, you could just tell who's going to stay with it. So I did do a little like reading with her, and we'd play. I remember playing the Elvis song "Love Me Tender." She would, I would play the chords, and then she would do the melody. She wanted me to like play with her. Towards the end of it, maybe when I was 11 years old, she literally wanted to. She played live, and she wanted to like bring me on stage, and maybe it'd be this novelty thing, like her little 11-year-old student. So I was doing pretty well, but we didn't get to that. For some reason, that didn't happen. But I was reading a little bit music to speak to your question, to answer it fully, but I eventually forgot. It wasn't something I pursued. I was starting to say something a moment ago I almost forgot too, when I was starting to say my parents did something good, and then I got off explaining about the lessons, is my parents knew enough to force me to play acoustic guitar for the first several years. So some of my friends, even by the time I was like 11 or 12, they were starting to play a guitar, and they went right to electric, and they just try to make noise and plug it into an amplifier. And even though neither of my parents played guitar, again, they were around music, they knew music, and they knew that you really cut your teeth on an acoustic guitar. It's just you and the wood that there's nothing else. You can't like kind of put it through sounds and try to make it sound like through the distortion that there's kind of something going on, even if there's not. I remember this one particular kid. I was kind of jealous of him because he got this cool electric guitar, and his dad got it for him, and he didn't even really know how to play. So there's a fascination with these bombastic sounds that an electric guitar can make, but they made me play for a good 3 years, just acoustic. Again, on that orangey amber guitar, and on my banner, Jason's kind of using as the background right now, our videos overlaid, but you can go to my music page, music.thegreatorder.com, or it's just on the main menu on my site. It's just the first menu link from thegreatorder.com, but the whole new music page, it looks a little different than the rest of the Great Order site. I have a banner of me with a lot of my equipment and instruments around me. So that's that guitar. But yeah, they made me cut my teeth on acoustic, and I'm really glad they did, because there's an intimacy you can't hide from when it's just you're manipulating the strings. You have to work a little harder. The strings are thicker. It's literally harder to play. It's harder on your hands. It's more of a workout. So they did good with that one.
Well, that's fast. I didn't know about the strings, and so just before we leave this, and again, we have a little bit more evocative questions, a little bit more digging into the sort of the science and the art of it, the mixture. Your parents, both mother and father, one parent, or not really at all? Did they nurture your interest, or did they encourage it? In other words, were they sort of out there with maybe a stick with a carrot on the end of like music is fun, or was it Jared George is toddling toward the music, and they said, well, we know some about music, and we're going to go ahead and help you along with your interests? Which was it?
They definitely didn't. It wasn't the kind of thing where they forced it. It wasn't like my dad was a frustrated musician and then he was determined that I was going to be a musician. So there was like, as you said, a carrot and stick. Nothing like that. My parents were pretty good about, with my brother and I, they just try to expose us, as good parents do, within their means the best they can. When kids are developing and there's so much to a child's mind and curiosity, and you just kind of want to see what takes, they just exposed me to a lot of different things. They took me to the computer programming lessons on Saturdays. I did for a tiny bit with a friend of mine, and an extra school thing they offered, not at my school, at another school. Martial arts. I was enjoying. I did martial arts for a few years at that time too, which I did enjoy. Different kind of sports and lessons, even ice skating, just any kind of skill, anything that they could scrap together. They would expose me to. My mom was not like a soccer mom, helicopter mom. It wasn't like rush from this lesson to the next. We've spoken about that, Jason, on this show, how everything's a balance, and you want to live your life and enjoy things. And in the case of being a parent, expose your children to things and give them opportunities. But far too many modern people now, it becomes this competition, or they're trying to live vicariously through their kids or outdo the other parents and act like my kid does more than your kid. And kids need time to breathe and play and have free time. So it was nothing like that. I have to say my parents hit a nice balance. They exposed me to things, but then they just kind of laid back and kind of saw what I took to, what I didn't. They'd check in with me. As I said, my parents both love music. My father especially, maybe we could get into this in a little bit, like a very deep connection actually with some of the music that we used to listen to. And it even relates, I'll give you a little teaser now, we could get more into it, even to things like race memory. My dad and I would have like heavy conversations all based around music. Music was always the doorway into it. It was a great bonding thing for my father and I. We speak about it even to this day. My father is even involved in certain regard where I kind of use him as a co-producer, and I let him hear the mixes because he has a really, really good ear, and I trust his instinct. So he's one of my key people that when something's being produced, he listens to it and he gives me feedback. And so that is there. But I don't think even when I was doing well, like I said, that guitar teacher wanted me to like play live with her, even though I was like 11 years old. It wasn't like, oh, Jared's going to be a musician. They didn't push me into it. There was no talk of that, nothing like that. I entirely later on in my teenage years just naturally developed into it on my own. There was a turning point in terms of being a songwriter, because it's one thing to be a kid who has some talent and can figure out riffs of his favorite rock songs. I do remember my parents coming home one day when I was maybe like 13 or 14, and they heard the music through the door before they came in. And I was playing, I think, some Metallica that other guitar teacher had, like when I was 13, 14, and it was more, the kind of stuff a 13, 14-year-old boy's going to want to play. And he would like break down how to play the riffs, and we'd be figuring it out together. My parents walked in and they were like, wow, you're doing that pretty well. And they were like, this is a nice thing. Like, no matter what you do in life, you'll have this skill, and it's this gift that you can enjoy. But that was really I think the extent of it. It'll be something that's there, and you have some talent, you're good at it, but it's just like another nice thing to enjoy. But cut to a few years later, when I was about 19, I'd always kind of come up with ideas. And at this point, I already had like files of ideas for like riffs and chord progressions. But I hadn't really written songs before. And when I was about 19, the summer from 19 to 20, I recorded my first batch of actual songs I'd written with a friend of mine. And he played drums and piano, and I played guitar and bass, and we both sang, and we layered it and made it sound like actual band songs, just the two of us. And even though the recording was very rudimentary, I didn't know anything about recording. My parents were like, man, like, you're spending a lot of time doing this summer. And even my dad, who, as I said, he's music lover, encouraging in a lot of ways. He was around music a little bit. Like I said, he worked just a little bit. I won't say more, but just a little bit in a few years of his life in music. He'd been around professional musicians and recording studios. So he also knew like the level you had to be at. And he was like, Jared, like, don't waste too much of your time here. Like, every day you're working on this, you're going to your friend's house. And there was a moment when my friend and I were done, and we gave this CD that we had made to my parents, and we went and we drove around the neighborhood, and we knew it would take them, it was about half an hour's worth of music, and we knew that it would take them a certain amount of time to listen to the songs. Mm-hmm. And we swung back around my house, and they were waiting for us outside, and they're like, come in. And everything changed after that.
Really?
There's a before and after moment, because even though it was a rudimentary recording, even though sometimes the timing would go off a little bit, even though our voices hadn't really developed, they knew that there was something going on there. It wasn't just guys fooling around, trying to be cool, trying to get girls. Like there's songs here. Like, where the hell did this come from? And no one can know what you can do until you have to show them. You have to demonstrate it. So even though it was very rudimentary, they knew enough about music to know, whoa, hold on, like you said you could write songs. That I knew nothing about songwriting. Like, I didn't study songwriting. I just remember the year before in college, like, friends heard me kind of fooling around on my guitar, on my bass, and they're like, you can play, you're good. And they're like, have you ever written songs? I was like, I think this summer coming up, me and a friend in my hometown, we're gonna get some recording equipment together and write some songs. And when I said it, it was just kind of like the guitar thing you were saying, Jason, with the extension. There was just something in the core of my being, in every fiber of my body, that I just knew I could do it. I don't know why or how. I just knew I could write songs.
Wow.
They could just come out, and they do. They come out, and we'll talk about this in all manner of ways. I mean, sometimes you're just fooling around on the guitar, and then you happen upon something, and you're like, that works, and you perk up. But sometimes, I said this to Jody yesterday when I was on her show, and she knew what I meant. It's a very hard thing to explain, I guess, for someone that's not a musician. But sometimes I feel a song internally, not even hear it. I feel what the emotion is in a very nascent form. And it's like you feel the silhouette of it emotionally, or the impact it'll have, or just the pulse of it in a very embryonic way. It's an extremely personal, extremely hard thing to explain. I mean, maybe if there is a bit of a sonic dimension and you hear it, the closest thing I can try to give you as like a reference point would be, maybe if you're walking by a car and someone has the windows rolled up, but they're listening to a song, and it's muffled, so you can't really make out exactly what the music is, but you hear the basic rhythm and some of the sounds, it's muffled through the windows. It's not quite like that, but it's a little bit like you get the vibe, you get the pulse, you get the direction of the song. I've had songs come to me in dreams, full chord progressions, melodies, the way the record's supposed to sound.
Wow.
Sometimes it's heartbreaking. I literally can't remember them as I'm waking up, but I've had a bunch that I do, and some of them have become songs. Some of them will be ones you'll hear eventually. I'll tell you, maybe, like, this was a dream song. This one came in a dream, or at least part of it. They come in all kinds of ways. I don't know why. I don't know how. I think, we talk to people like Laura Lee about we're all made up in different ways. We have different things we're tuned into, different talents. And for whatever reason, I don't question it, but the tap is open. The tap is open for songwriting. And it's obviously one of the main things I'm supposed to do in my time here. So that's why I'm very happy, man. I have to tell you, I know we've talked a little about this privately, you and I, before doing the show tonight, but there's a tremendous sense of relief too, now that I have this song out. I know it's just one song. It's not like it's a whole body of work to talk about yet. But at least that entry point is there. At least I've said hello. And I feel like even the other things that I do, everything we do and talk about, the contours are kind of filled out more now. And maybe I feel like I can be fully myself. And maybe some of the things that I say, or some of the ways I carry myself, or some of the things I'm interested in, maybe make more sense now in this context of being an artist and actually having delivered something publicly. Because as I said, with that story about my parents hearing the songs I worked on with a friend, you can talk to you're blue in the face about, I'm going to do this. I think I know how to do this. I think I have something, but it doesn't mean jack until you actually do it. You actually ship, as they say. You ship something. You have a product to show for what you're talking about.
Well, and I want to, and this is, it's fascinates me because you are the way you talk about this. It's almost as though the music, the instrument. So it seems to me a little bit more tangible to phrase this as a guitar, but it seems like it could be any instrument. As the music comes through you, is the music is a wand that you are conducting that energy, that whatever that might be, whatever words you want to put to it, that you are using that wand to then reach out from yourself to, and especially everyone else, especially someone like yourself, who is, and Jody now, who are, and so many others in our community that are performing music, tapping into something that is greater, something that is bigger, and for us as Westman would be that source. And it really fascinating. So you can hold on to that if you want to comment that, but before we get into some of the some of the questions we talked about earlier, I have to ask: was this friend of yours that you were speaking about a moment ago, and you two put the music together? Would you consider this your first band, or is there a first band that you would like, without, of course, giving away, maintaining anonymity? Is there a first band that you were in that you would mention, and or a first gig, and maybe change the locations? Or
yeah. Actually, no, it's funny. I'm glad you're asking all this. Again, I've done. Anyone that's interested for whatever reason, you can go to my site and you'll see I've done a bunch of different shows this week, but they're all different. And Jason's asking things that, this hasn't been said before. So this is all brand new, folks. But if you want, I actually started a new category on my site, music interviews, to delineate from regular appearances. Sometimes people have me on their stream to just talk about current events and politics to some degree. I think you all know that's not my main thing, but now I've started a separate category just for music interviews. So you can go check that out, but that's great. Jason's asking some things that no one's asked before. So actually, yeah, I'm glad you asked that. When I was 14 years old, I did play. That was the first gig. It was out in a tent at like a school function that someone had put together. And actually the guy who I later, a few years down the road with, did these early recordings I was telling you about, where my parents were like, and other people too, not just my parents, because you still could say, well, your parents are still going to have a bias, but enough other people were like, whoa, okay, so something's going on here. Acquaintances, people at college when I went back to college. So it wasn't just parents being like, hey, good job, Jared. and as I said, especially my dad's background. He's not a hey, everyone gets a medal. He's actually my harshest critic in a lot of ways. And when I haven't done something up to snuff, he tells me, or sometimes it's a taste thing and we have different opinions. But I don't want to give the wrong impression. He wants to see me do my best. So. And maybe it was like this with you in sports, Jason. It's like, okay, if you're going to do this, it's not like our fathers, I'm sure, weren't like, everybody gets a prize. It was, you rise to the occasion and you have to really do this. You have to have a craft here. But I was 14 and first gig, but the kid who was the one I did the songs with, as I mentioned, he was involved in it too. There were these attempts at bands, different guys getting together, and we do covers and or try to start writing some things. Actually, so the 14-year-old at the school function, just doing some covers, that was the first actual time up in front of people, playing. And electric guitar, drums, it was full band stuff. It probably sounded like an absolute mess. But you talk about trying to form a band, Jason. It's funny, you're bringing up all these memories. I hope this is interesting for people, but we're going with it. And I do have to finish the thread that you started, because actually, and again, I think this speaks to that instinct thing that's just always there. Even when you're a kid, it's going to be in a very basic, messy way. You don't have the skills yet. You don't have the experience yet. But it all starts with a drive, because you have that instinct. You have a makeup to do something in the world. Shortly after I began taking those guitar lessons, just that innocent acoustic guitar, scales, and then Love Me Tender by Elvis with the nice middle-aged woman who'd come to the house once a week. Probably not even a year into that, at most 10 years old, with another friend, totally different than anyone I've been referencing thus far. We tried to start a band, and we tried to get another guy involved, and we immediately started to try to write songs. And I literally remember at least two songs from when I was 9 or 10 years old that we were trying to write. And one was called My Girl. My Girl was the first song I ever tried to write. And I still remember the first opening lines and the melody of it. And I can still remember the melody. So actually it was a little decent melody. It was always there. It was always trying to say, even when I barely knew how to play, it was, let's get some guys together. All right, I know these few major chords. I'll strum this one, then I'll strum that one, then I'll strum that one. Mm-hmm. And what kind of goes over it? It was early in the morning, close to dawn. No, I woke up and I saw you were gone. It was early in the morning, close to dawn. Those are the opening lines of My Girl. Still remember it. So I was trying to write. So I don't even know if it was a complete song. I don't know if it wasn't like full verses and choruses and a bridge and back to a chorus. It was maybe just the first 30 seconds of a song. But changes. There was attempts at songwriting even at 9 or 10 years old, and there was we called our band Iron Cobra. That we tried to have something that was very, rocking and metal and masculine. So it was called Iron Cobra. Was the first name of the band. But yeah, man, it goes right back to the beginning.
Well, listen to that, folks. What a take you're getting here. You've known this man for several years now, and now you're finally digging into some of the secrets behind the man. And what we're going to do now, since we've got some of the superficial stuff out of the way, we're going to dig into the song itself. And I may have successfully done something here. We're going to try to do it. We're going to try to listen to several seconds of the song that we are going to be talking about today, which is Jared George's debut, Someone to Know. We'll have a quick listen, and then we're going to ask Jared about the impetus behind this piece.
We seem more a solid thing, promising all well. When youth was first blossoming, ringing as a bell. All the searching in your heart, something in the swell. Wonder if it ever will mean something to tell. I know what you need, someone just to know all the things we seem to be going through. I know what you need, just someone to know.
All right, Jared, the impetus behind Someone to Know, a magnificent first piece to make his musical gold record debut, a piece that I love. The first question, of course, I have to ask is, what was her name?
That was interesting because it started off fast. I don't know what happened with the playback, but it was like faster than normal.
The speed, you mean?
The speed, just the first few seconds was like, it was sped up. I don't know how, but we'll figure out the streaming. As Jason said, the actual version you download is the highest quality. You can go to different sites. And for anyone that knows music, Iron Cobra is a drum pedal, but when we were 9, 10 years old, we did not know that. So it's not because someone's older brother had bass drum pedal lying around, a kick drum pedal. It's because we just thought of Iron Tiger, Cobra. So you're the first person that asked that. I guess everyone has their own take, and I don't like to, I'm not going to tell people, bit by bit what lyrics meant to me or what's behind it too much, because I think that once you put something out, it needs to live with people, of course, and it's not yours once you release it. Mm-hmm. Once you release it, it's ours. It's passed around the people that like it, and it starts to mean something to them, and they live with it. So that's not to say that I can't speak about the song. Obviously, we're about to. But I will say, as much as I don't like to tell too much about the song, you can't have just be a free for all. So it's actually not about a woman. I'd never heard someone make that interpretation, but there was no woman behind it. But interesting. I'd be curious as to why it hit you that way. But the song itself, I'll start by saying this. You all know, you'd heard me for a while talking about how I'm gonna start doing music. I'm gonna start doing music, and I know I'd been saying it for months and months, and people, and I even before that, it was last year, I was saying eventually I'm going to do it. And then when I actually began to start working on it with intention, and I knew that I had to do it in 2020, probably half a year ago in the spring, you heard me more regularly say, I'm working on something now, so it's going to happen sooner rather than later. And why did it take so long? Well, there's a bunch of reasons, but one of them is that I had to find the right song to be the entry point, because I knew I wanted to do this one song at a time sort of release schedule. And I had certain parameters for what I wanted the first song to be like. I have a lot of different musical interests and things that I want to do with music and styles that I like to work in. And the first song had to combine a lot of my main threads. And I mean, we're touching on a bunch of things now, so please let me know what you want to get back to. I have my own, in my own way. This is a very Western thing as well. And I've gone into depth on this on some other shows. There's these twin, we talk often about this, we have these twin drives. And one of them with art and music for me is to be very rooted to the core and the tradition and something earthy, and at the same time have emotion that is very forward-looking and futurist in a way. And that term that we've gotten from the Guillaume Faye book that you see come up a lot, archaeofuturism, I know people see it a lot, but I do think it's a useful term and it's a good term. I know that the Fash Wave aesthetic contains that sort of thing as well, when they combine kind of some of the 80s graphic design elements or neon with classical statues. So I get what's going on there. That's not really my thing. I'm not really interested in that, and I think enough people do that already. But in my own way, there is this tendency, this drive towards both something very rooted, but you're thrusting forward into the new tomorrow at the same time. So both in the graphic presentation, and I have some visual art references that feed into this, maybe we could talk about later. But since we're talking about the song itself, there's the earthy classic rock that I'm into from the 60s and 70s that plays into this heavily. But I very much wanted to also have, I love playing around with anything that makes sound. I'm not a purist about that kind of thing. And I like synthesizers and what you can do with that as well. And even though synthesizers aren't a new thing, they've been around for a few decades, there's still something more futurist or hinting at, there's something technological about, the sound of certain synthesizers. And I wanted to mix these things together because I have an interest in electronic production, but also very analog, earthy, acoustic instruments as well. So I wanted to combine these different styles. I wanted to have it be a full band presentation, so I had to figure out a drummer situation because that's the one instrument that I don't play on the song is the drums. Mm-hmm. And I knew the first one, as I said, you get one shot at your introduction. So yeah, I have songs that rock harder. I have songs that tend more electronic. I have songs that are more acoustic, or the next one I'm doing isn't technically all acoustic. It is on an electric, but it's not that distorted kind of electric. It's more ethereal sounding. There's acoustic in it as well. There's not full drum set. There might be some percussion, but it's a little more dreamy and open. And that's what I'm working on right now for the December release. And it makes sense too. I like that about the monthly release thing because I'm working on it right now. So there's the December vibes in the air. And I like that quick feedback loop, like it'll be out soon. So I'm composing it at the same time I'll be releasing it, and you as the audience will be ingesting it. Because working on this song that you heard Someone to Know a couple months ago, I'm very affected by artists were open, our antennas out. So the weather, the seasons, I'm in a very different state. I feel differently now in these short days of December and Yule approaching and the lights and the darkness. A very different feel than a couple months ago or 6 weeks ago when I was finishing up Someone to Know, the song that you were just listening to. So there's that element too. But to get back to this first song, Someone to Know, it had to tick these different boxes. I wanted it full band presentation, my rock sound to be front and center, but also these electronic, futuristic elements. I wanted it to be a pop format, verse, chorus, a catchy sing-along chorus, and tick all these boxes and somehow not have it sound like a mess. So that was without having it sound like I was shoehorning too many things in or trying to say too much at once. Because as I said, no matter what I did, there's some people that I know are going to hear it who might love some other things I'm going to do. They might hear Someone to Know and be like, oh, it's not really my thing. And as an artist, you do have that element of, not that you want validation or approval from other people, but you want your thing, your inner life, to be understood by another. And you want to show someone the fullness of that. That's one disadvantage of releasing songs one at a time instead of, say, doing an album where there are 12 songs and there'd be a variety of styles. So people would like you might like these 3 the best, and then Sally might like these other 4 the best, and they're different from your 3 and her 4 are 2 different things, but there's a little something for everyone on an album of 10 or 12 songs. But ultimately, I still think I made the right choice. And I like what I'm doing with the magazine style release, where it's about, roughly about a song a month is what I'm going to be doing. And it's not like they're all done. There's songs in various states, and a few of them are things that I'd written in my past that I'm kind of reworking now. But it's not like I have them all in the can and ready, and I'm just, now I can sit back and release them. Like, no, this is a rolling thing. I'm working on them as they're coming out, which is an interesting challenge. And as I said, for a number of reasons, I think for me and just for the day and age we live in, the way people consume media on the internet, it just seems to make sense on a lot of levels. It's not to say I'm never going to do an album if I want to do an album as a statement, but for the time being, for the foreseeable future, they're coming out one at a time. So that's, Jason, some of the music. And then lyrically, again, I'm not going to talk, we're not going to, you can't analyze and be super specific about lyrics, but I did want something that also felt of the moment. And I literally, again, in terms of that, being in touch with the subconscious and what the wellspring that you draw from, I literally remember asking in September, what is the song? What is the song I need to introduce myself? But for other people, I wasn't really even thinking about me. For other people, what do they need to hear now? What's something of the moment? What's something that's going to be something that could be a point of camaraderie and healing in this time, especially 2020? There's a lot of confusion, a lot of pain. There had been a song I was working on a lot in the summer that I thought was going to be the first one. And you will eventually still hear that. I think it's a great song. And I worked on it so much, it spawned other songs. Sometimes that happens too. I was like, you know what? The chorus isn't catchy enough. Let me make the chorus the bridge. And now I actually need a chorus. And then I tried to write a new chorus, and it wouldn't really fit perfectly, but it was a cool melody or a cool chord progression. So that became a seed for another song. So kind of like fractals blossoming out. That one song I was working on in the late summer that I thought was going to be the song, the first one, the debut, actually spawned 2 or 3 other songs. And I have those files of some chord progressions too. So that's a cool thing too. It's sometimes songs kind of have brothers and sisters and they kind of blossom out. But lyrically, Someone to Know, I think that it's not too much to say that when you hear the chorus, I know what you need, someone just to know that there's a general movement or theme of empathy, of being heard, of people are going through things. A lot of their experiences might feel very private and that someone else doesn't understand. we all need to complete this feedback loop of relationship. I'm very interested, and you know this too, and this is why you and I became friends, because we saw in the other man, when we would talk, we tried to be really present with each other. We let the other guy finish. I was very impressed with you, because not a lot of people do this, Jason, where we could be on the phone. I remember some of our early phone conversations when we were first getting to know one another, and maybe I would speak for 3 minutes on something, and then you would say, "Yeah, you said this in the beginning, but I want to hear a little more about that." You weren't just waiting for your turn to speak.
Mm-hmm.
We were engaging. It was real communication. This is what I look for in the people I'm closest with. And unfortunately, because of the frantic modern world I mentioned before, that's becoming more and more rare. But it is wonderful to see in what we do here that there are a lot of high character people who don't want to live that way. We all have our responsibilities. We all have busy schedules sometimes. But we're also all living our lives. And what is all the other stuff we do to support ourselves? What is all that worth if we don't have the true warmth and the real juice and marrow of life of sharing all of this together and real relationship and real communing? So all of those kind of sentiments are, generally speaking, what the thrust is behind the lyric of the song. And it seemed like the right sentiment at the right moment. And it seemed to hit people. You can't get too thrown off when people praise you to the high heavens, or when people criticize you, but it's not constructive criticism. You're going to be on an emotional roller coaster if you listen to all the different feedback you get and you take all of it seriously. But actually, suspiciously, there's almost been like no criticism. I'm kind of blown away by that. I thought at least there'd be trolls trying to discourage me. But the best feedback you usually get as a creative person isn't even necessarily that the person's like, "Oh, I think you're the best thing since sliced bread." It's simply when someone reflects back to you what you were trying to do. So I've had some people that I know have enough of a similar reference point. They like some of the same music I do, so they have an ear for it. And they were able to say things to me like, "I hear the classic rock influences, but it doesn't sound like a retro act. It doesn't sound like these bands who just buy all the old equipment and put bell bottoms on and try to pretend like we're still in 1971.
Mm-hmm.
There are some bands that do that, and if they really think that they're continuing a tradition, like a folk art tradition, and that's really their passion, I'm not disparaging that. There are some bands that do that very well, but that's never been my thing. I don't want to be a retro act. I have my influences, but I always want to fuse them and harmonize them and bring them together into this recipe that still sounds fresh, and it's something for our moment, and it couldn't have been made at any other time. And so the best feedback I've gotten is when people tell me that they get that, or that they got the empathy and the relational aspect from the lyrics. So when you know that the message, the signal has been heard, that's a nice thing as an artist, because as I said, you can't rush around looking for approval. And I've had a long enough life as an artist, and certainly, even though it wasn't as a musician, the context of the last few years we've been doing this together, learning a little more the dynamics of being a bit of a public figure and what goes along with that, I have a pretty good sense of myself, of how I direct myself, and I don't let myself get thrown off by the odd comment. So there's a pretty stable center there to begin with. You're not looking for validation at every turn, and you're not losing sleep over every little criticism. But ultimately, as I said, every creative person, why are you putting it out into the world if you're not looking to complete that circuit and have your experience, your emotion that you try to express through your art, be received by another person? So you do, not in terms of validation, but as I mentioned, just in terms of the signal was heard.
Mm-hmm.
It's nice to hear that a fair amount of people got, to put it, and to use the way that we you use that word, you get it. In popular parlance, they get it. And that was nice to see. And I think the catchiness thing was achieved too, because for better or worse, I hope it's okay, but apparently this song is accompanying people on their work days. They're using it as their phone alarm. So they're writing me saying, I can't get out of my head. So I said, I hope you like the song, but apparently it is a bit of an earworm. So I accomplished that too. It does seem to be catchy. And all those years of songwriting craft and trying things and pushing myself, I guess it paid off in that regard.
It's absolutely catchy. It's been in my head since the first time I heard it. And now I'm going to light your fuse here. We're kind of talking sort of tangentially about a number of the questions that I want to be able to cover while we're together today, sort of like swans circling the creative fire. But I'm going to light your fuse here because this is the kind of thing that is, I know you would like to dig into. My question about what was her name, we've seen, after looking at the lyrics to the song, we see occasionally in music, even the biggest of rock bands, that some great song or some lousy song could be the totality of it created as a consequence of some woman in the life of the music writer. But while there is that, there is also, I know from my own creative process, there can be a feminine energy, even in a man, that can sort of guide or sort of can accompany that creative process, can come and go and inform the totality of the process. So if you had to speak to such an energy, perhaps informing, perhaps coming and going during the creative process, what would you say to that? Did you feel and then we'll just tie this together with my question about your creative process, emotional, intellectual, both?
Everything. That I can tell you is everything.
And this idea of a feminine and masculine energy coming and going throughout the creative process, and this piece in particular. And what's really fascinating, I think, too, is Mr. George was just talking about here, is he is creating these pieces now. He's not coming to you at the end of the road here and saying, well, here are all the songs, here's all of the music. He is very much in the midst of the creative process. So you're seeing a portion. So if you could imagine the totality of the album is the creation, and you're kind of, by doing this one song at a time, you're getting this little look inside, this little look under the hood of the totality of the creative process for the artist. So the creative process, feminine, masculine energy behind this particular song, and go. All yours.
Jason, I love you. We could probably do a whole show just on this.
Yeah.
Well, you know that one of my touch points is holistic, is one of my favorite words, or harmony. And that's a through line that combines my activist work with my creative work. Because the impetus behind whether it's writing music or the more political and sociological things that were going on in the world that first led me a few years ago to say I want to step out, is seeing a lot of imbalances in the world and discord, and how we receive all kinds of messages in what we ingest, and even the literal food that we ingest increasingly. Everything is so compartmentalized or separated from how it actually holistically, organically appears originally in nature. Again, whether it be food or even an idea, we're given these half-truths, or these little, just the way that in a laboratory, if you eat a piece of fruit with everything else going on in it, the sugar is okay, the natural sugar is okay. If you extract it in a lab and then you put it, and then you refine it and you mix it with all this other stuff and you use it as an artificial sweetener, and you put it in whatever it is, candy or Tic Tacs, then that's not giving your body anything. That's robbing you of life force. Mm-hmm. The same thing happens with ideas too. You and I, again, one of the first things you and I connected on in our early shows you and I were both and this is another area that I knew you were a kindred spirit and that you and I had the potential to be great friends like we became, is that you and I were very keen on taking some of the debates that were going on at the time when you and I started doing shows in early 2018 and saying a lot of this stuff, these are false dichotomies. If you remember, the individualism versus collective thing was big at the time. That's one of the very first things you and I spoke about, is all this stuff. It's not an either or, and people are getting corralled into these sides. Are you on team individualism or are you on team collectivism? These things, like masculine and feminine, which you said, relate to one another, can't really be alone without the other, are symbiotically swirling together. So much of the modern world is against this kind of holistic consciousness, this holistic way to live and understand things. It creates discord within you, and then you project that discord out into the world. No wonder why there's so much discord and ugliness and chaos right now. So on the deepest level, the through line, whether it's more social work I do through what could generally be called activism, or the raw creative work of me, as you said, trying to be this antenna and pick up things from the ether, from the ancestral memory, it all is ensconced in my intention of being an agent of harmony in the world. That's what I'm here to do. And so when you talk about masculine and feminine, that is how I was just saying the harmony, the interplay of the poles that on one level people may think are opposites, but on the deepest level, I don't even think it's the fullest definition to say that they're opposites. But life is created and sustained by that dance between the poles, negative and positive electric charges or magnetic charges, or masculine and feminine. What creates life itself? And even this is being attacked right now. It's the union of masculine and feminine. On a biological level, obviously, the cells from our bodies meet to create a new life, to create a fetus. The same process, one of the reasons I named my whole thing The Great Order, is because I think that these truths reflect themselves on every level of being if your eyes are open to it. So even within yourself, and I know we've spoken a little about this on past shows, Jason, there's a meeting of masculine and feminine, whether or not you're a man or you're a woman. And we've said this, even the most aggressive soldier, like a guy who's meant to be purely a warrior, Navy SEAL, and has all of that outward masculine protect and defend and fight when necessary energy. I'm sure that elite soldiers can tell you that in the midst of battle or a fight, there's still very much an intuition. You can't be too in your head. Second to second, you have to be responding and reacting, and in a weird way, you could even say there's an art to it. So there's always an interplay between our conscious intentions and that forward thrust, which we could generally think of as masculine, and then something that is web-like and intuitive and receiving and flowing with the waves and the circumstances as they're happening, and that's more feminine. And as an artist, when you're an artist, I know what this sounds like. I know it might sound lofty to some people, especially if you're not creative, but I hope no matter what you do in life that there's something you can use from this. But I really get to experience it as a creative person because I'm constantly dancing between that conscious intention. As I said, I have certain, like I was explaining to you a little bit about the song a few minutes ago, I wanted to do certain things with this song. So it's not like I sit willy-nilly in the lotus position and I'm just like, universe, give me a song, and I'm totally passive. There's very much a conscious intention. There's the work I've done in my life up to this point, the things I know how to do. And yet there's also very much a receptivity. And you're ping-ponging between these things, and I like to use that image of the DNA strand. These threads, they're weaving together all the time in you, partially your conscious intention and partially these surprises. You can't be too in your head. You have to be a little bit relaxed and loose. And that's why musicians, creative people, especially musicians, famously sometimes seem like they're a little distracted or things take a little longer. And this is why, as much as you know, it's very important to me. I'm a communicator, and I also feel a calling to take some of the social things going on or some of the ideas. As you know, I've mentioned how ideas are also usurped right now and imbalanced, and be a voice like what we do on our streams. It's challenging for me sometimes. You could even see it now, maybe, because this is my true character is really archetypally as an artist. So I probably don't think as linearly as some other people, and a lot of things kind of come to me at once, and then I try my best to be articulate with it and not have it just be a mess. As much as I love communicating and being on these streams, it's not as much my home base and natural as some people might think, even though I've spewed probably millions of words at this point on live streams. We never have a shortage of something to talk about. As an artist, a lot of the times, what I want to say most deeply and communicate most fundamentally can't be put into rational words. That's why when I do use words, I like the poetic. I write poems too. Even on our streams, when you have to be linear and you have to explain something when someone asks a question, or it's your turn to respond to something, even on streams, I'm sure sensitive people can tell I have a way of speaking, a way of carrying myself, things that I care about that still hint at that more web-like mytho-poetic mind. But the core of it for me, the deepest thing, is music itself. And that's why I need to make music, because that's the deepest things I have to say can't be said in a rational way. And sometimes you don't want to explain any further, and you want to leave the mystery there. That's what I meant, where there's sometimes even a reluctance to do things that are more essay-like or speech-like. But I think I lost my train of thought. The why musicians are sometimes classically thought of as flighty, or things take long, or they're distracted. It's because everything is fodder for your potential next song or poem or something like that. And you have to be really careful. You have to be really, really careful that you're not just open to anything. And that's, again, where that more direct mind, I think of the masculine mind or the conscious as opposed to the subconscious, has to make sure that doesn't take too much of a back seat. So there's constantly this interplay. And it's very interesting for me too, getting into a sphere where we do have to very precisely and robustly talk about our heritage and the moment, the crisis we're in the Western world, and it means something to be a Westman. And I had to figure out for myself how I could be a person who's wired as an artist. So I'm very open. On a few other shows, I've said, we're like dogs in a certain way, artists. It's like, what are you about? What are you about? What are you about? There's a suspension of judgment sometimes. So someone like me might not be the very first person that would get into something where it's very more about boundaries and it means something to be of the West. And this is why I wrote the foundational essays on my website before I even started, 9 foundational essays that you can find on the why. It's called the why. There's like an about, and there's foundational essays, because I had to kind of square that circle for myself. And one of the things I hope is that, not that I'm the only one, but being someone who is more creative, radically creative. Like my friends and I were so creative when we were kids, we didn't know what to do with ourselves. It was our recreation. I mean, we did go outside and play sports, and we're active too, and get some good exercise, as is a healthy thing to do. But even from a teenage years, as I said, maybe not even the full band thing yet, but we were playing around with music, but we were making videos or writing scripts or doing this mock radio show where we put on voices and be characters calling in. Like everything we did was creative. That's who I am. It's what I'm here to do. So if I can model for other people out there, because we all need to see and hear from other people that are like us, I can be a guy who might not be the first kind of personality you would think of would be involved in something like this. But if I can be here and do it, maybe another guy or woman out in the chat could be like, my experience is a little more like Jared, or my mind works a little more like Jared's, and he's doing this, and he can be an open person, but still advocate for his culture and still do the right thing and not hide his head in the sand about the crisis in the West and everything going on. That's another big motivation for me, or big, like, underneath the tip of the iceberg kind of thing for me, is to be able to model that, to show up and say, I can be an artist, and all the things that come with being an artist, the dog thing. What are you about? What are you about? It's true. There is, and it's great, and it gives you raw material, but it also, as I said, it's something you really have to watch out for. This is why artists classically do tend to be more liberal-minded and willy-nilly, and there's a lot of sometimes, unfortunate stereotypes, but they're true, is they don't have that sense of boundaries, and I had to make sure to really get that right in myself. So that is another kind of like bigger picture way of how the masculine and the feminine, even in yourself, they kind of meet and play. So yeah, I mean, there's so much to say here, but I feel like I should probably pause and let's see what else you have, or if there's something from the chat.
But we've been talking very deeply here. There's been a lot of almost like intangible, perhaps for a lot of people, there's emotion, there's some sort of spirituality that we can't measure yet. There are a lot of things, obviously, that you can see as a creative person. Mr. George here is trying to articulate in something that in many ways is ineffable. So I think maybe we'll take a bit of a respite from that for the moment, and we'll go quotidian here and for a few questions, and then I'll look at some of the questions that maybe the audience might have at this point, and that is music or lyrics, which came first for this piece?
Oh, for someone to know the music came first, it can start with songs, certain songs, so start with a melody, and then it's kind of nonsense like phonetics, and then I put words to it. So in that way, that's usually the way lyrics would come first, if they do come first. But usually it's some kind of musical element, even if it is in the form of a melody. So me saying la ba ba beep ba ba da ba ba, like just, as I said, nonsense phonetics, and then you shape words around it. It was interesting to talk to John Bruce Leonard about this too, because he's an author and he's very literary minded. So he asked me about this, because you might think that 99% of the time, when it's a musical element coming first, the writer part of you might think that's limiting, because you only have so many syllables in a line you could fit in. But I mean, the same is true of poetry, even if you're not setting it to music. And there's beauty in the limits, as you well know. It's when you have certain limits that is what brings out creativity. So there has to be some kind of parameter. I've never found in all my years of writing songs that the fact that the vast majority of the time that the music comes first, that limits what I can say, just because there's certain syllables or a syntax that needs to fit into a line. It's just like a fun puzzle to figure out. And again, that's the interplay of the masculine and feminine. Some of it is intuitive, but you also have that headspace where you have to say, I can't use that word. It's just too long. It's too awkward. You have to mold it and sculpt it so that everything's working together. But most of the times, like in this song, and the vast majority of the time, it's the music comes first, and there's, as I said, a vague impression of something I want to convey, you can't have lyrics that are too literal either, or why not just give a speech? I love it when you get these guys that are like, I have a master's degree in English, I'll be the lyricist. Inevitably, they write these clunky, long, too verbose lyrics. You have to be able to say a lot with a little. That's the craft of popular songwriting. So yeah, I love writing lyrics, but they give wisps and impressions. It's not always literal. It suggests something. It gives an image. And even in rock music in particular, as an idiom, as a genre, you don't always hear everything perfectly. Even production-wise, they don't always mix vocals as loud as they do in other genres. You might notice in certain pop music or jazz music, it's easier to hear the words, or folk music. They're telling a story about a guy in a small town and his plight, and it's this folk song, the story about John Brown. Well, in that case, there's still a poetry to it, but you're telling a story about this man's life, and it's a little more clear than a lot of the rock music I'm into. There's supposed to be something where it's rock music. It's a very hard thing to talk about, because it's not like we're saying the lyrics aren't important, but they're almost talking to your subconscious. There's still something suggestive and impressionistic about them. And that's why I know people have different feelings on this. And I certainly understand the people whose English is not their first language. I've gotten this feedback. But as of now, I've made the decision not to publish my lyrics. That doesn't mean that if you can pick them out, I don't mind if you recite a line. I mean, it's yours now as much as it's mine, like I said. But I think reading the text on a page is a different experience. This is an auditory experience. It's supposed to be heard. If you hear something that's a different word than I wrote, and you think it's this word, and then it lives in you and it comes to mean something in you, then that's okay. That's part of, when you're an artist, that's part of releasing your baby out into the world, and now it lives with other people.
Yeah, that's magnificent. I think that's exactly the way it lands on people, and especially somebody like me who has a problem. Actually, holds true for music, especially. I am weak at being able to pull a single voice out of a crowd of noise. My mind is trying to pick up all of the bits of noise, and so this past weekend while I was in Texas, found that I lean in really close with one ear. It could be either ear, because I hear just as well or just as bad with either ear, but I'll lean in really close with one ear to try to hear just their voice. Yeah. Everything else out. So speaking with language and different languages, and we'll stay right there, with what tongues, with what languages, i.e. instruments, are we hearing this someone to know?
Acoustic guitar, electric bass, and then a few different synthesizer sounds that are played or triggered on a keyboard. And then, of course, the drummer. As I said, that's the one instrument I didn't play. That's a performance by a drummer, a live performance, set to the track that I'd given him. And of course, my voice. Can't forget that, me singing. I think that's everything.
And how did you, what was this interplay with the drummer? Since this was the one instrument you did not play, did you work with that? And were you on the phone with that person? Were you saying this is, or did you essentially write the music for the drummer and then the drummer played it? Or how did that come about?
There's a few different ways to do it. Usually the best thing when you do it this way is the basic chord progression, because it started on an acoustic guitar, and a lot of this music, I feel you need to be able to do it just you on an acoustic guitar, or you with a piano if it's more of a piano song, because it should have enough harmonic changes and the melody should be strong enough where you can do it that way. And I'm sure I'll, both via live performances, but also maybe just a recorded version, I'm sure I'll release like a stripped down version of Someone to Know at some point where you just hear my voice and guitar so you can hear it that way. So talking about folkish and heritage elements, it actually is in lute tuning. It's not in standard tuning. You tune the guitar just a little bit differently, the relationship of each string to the other. And it's actually how lutes were tuned back in the Middle Ages and Renaissance times. So it's a little bit of my, folk soul bard thing coming through. So I played the guitar track, and you play it to time to a metronome. And what I did was, in this case, I made like a mock beat, just so the drummer could hear the basic pulse of the song. So I programmed something very simple. I had a scratch vocal track, so not the final vocal track, but just so he could hear the melody, because it helps a musician. I know this too. When you hear a little more of it, a drummer's not only playing off of the basic rhythm of me playing acoustic guitar. If he has the bass, I think he had the bass and my voice, so he hears the melody. There's still subtle changes an artist will make to maybe he hits a drum just a certain way to accent a phrase that I sing, and that's what makes it alive. And a lot of that is we're starting to miss some of that in the way modern, more contemporary music is produced. Production's a whole other thing, and I have very strong feelings on that. I don't like how a lot of modern music sounds, just the sonics of how it strikes you when it comes through the speakers. And I don't know if we have time to talk about that, but the basic answer with the drummer is just he gets kind of a bare bones version of it, and has a dummy drum track, just programmed electronic drums. And then I send him a version also without the dummy drums. Obviously he needs to play. So he plays to that, to the version without the drums. And then he gives me the drums back, and I continue to layer things over them. And I also do production things, like I run his basic drums that he mic'd, then I run it through different equipment that expands the audio more, gives it more character, put a little echo on it, give it more room, and do things that are appropriate with the other sonic elements of how the guitars and the synthesizers sound. So I produce it, and I make it sound bigger or more, fit in better with the mix, the balance of the other instruments. But that's essentially how it's done, how that was done.
Now, that's actually very interesting, because I had no comprehension of how that could even begin to come together, communicate the instrument that you're not playing to the person who's here. So that's really fascinating. Were any of the parts of this song, and we'll make this sort of like a twofer, any of the parts of Someone to Know pieces of other music that you brought together? Was there a pure continuity from start to finish for this piece, or did you say, well, I had this from something from the past,
right, like graft on another idea is what
or maybe this other idea that I was thinking about using for the future that instead I'm going to bring in over here? And along with that, did you have this stuff, did you have it written down somewhere, or are you keeping much of this in sort of a protean existence in your mind, and then sort of roping it in and bringing it in?
So to your first question, that can definitely happen with other songs where you graft something in, where you're like, I had this little riff and it wasn't anything else, but now it'll fit perfectly in this section in this new song. So that definitely happens. As I said earlier, in a kind of the opposite direction of how sometimes when you're writing a song, it'll spawn other ideas for other songs. You're trying things and they're like, it doesn't fit into this section, but it's a nice chord progression in and of itself. So you're like, this could actually form the basis for an entirely different song. The opposite direction works too, where sometimes you have these little, like you're saying, Jason, these ideas that were floating around, and then they didn't have a home, or they didn't become a song in their own right, but then they fit snugly into this thing that you're writing. In the case of Someone to Know, it was all new music. And so nothing was referenced from another little idea I had somewhere else, like a stray orphan idea. It was all, once I got the idea, started with the chord progression and the melody of the verse. This seemed more a solid thing, promising all well. That and the guitar playing under it, like that's how it started. Well, really the riff, the opening riff. Then it was what would chords be like after this? And I figured that out. And then I began to hum, an embryonic melody over it. And then it kind of went from there. But all the other stuff, all of the bells and whistles, or the synth sounds, or little guitar overdubs and little lines and counterpoints, it all naturally, to answer your question, it all happened from the song. So it all was born of the same thrust. In terms of writing things down, so as I said, I don't write music. I don't know music theory. What I do mainly is when I come up with an idea, I do have a file, and I usually use the voice memos on my phone, on my mobile. And what I'll do is I'll play a guitar riff or chord progression, and I'll be like, it was in this tuning, because I use different tunings. I'll be like, it was in this, make it like a voice note. So I was in this tuning, and then I was doing this here. Like I put my fingers here, then I put my fingers there, and then I email it to myself just in case I lost my phone or something. So it's in two places. So if I ever need to go back to it, then it's there. I had the experience of, so the song that's going to be December's song, I'll give you the exclusive. No one's heard its name yet. It's going to be called Far Away. So that's going to be the second song, and that's what's coming out soon. So tap exclusive. I think it's appropriate for my good friend Jason that you heard it here first. So Far Away actually has existed in another form in the past, and I did have notes, or like I had rudimentary recordings of it, right? Different versions when I was like figuring it out or messing with it a few years ago. And I had iPhone. I use my iTunes too. Like I have an older phone where the whole iTunes is like, it's barely other artists. It's just different playlists of things I've worked on through the years. So I go to this other phone and I go through all the different Faraway files of when I was messing around with it, when it was being born or in other forms. And I kicked myself because I didn't do the voice note thing to myself. I didn't say at any point, these are the chords. So I write so many songs. I know this sounds funny, but sometimes I have to refigure out what I did, the riffs and the chord progressions. So I had to refigure it out. And fortunately I did. And I have a guitar take now. It's actually just messing with the vocals right before we got on air. But sometimes I have to do that. I literally have to refigure out some of my songs. But the most it is a voice note. But there's no notation because I don't know how to read music. So it's all just, it's all feel and in my head.
Well, we'll stick right with that. And that next thing I would like to ask is when you felt like you had the stack complete for someone to know, did you find yourself adding to it as you began recording and producing it? Or did you feel like this is my product and I'm just going to work on bringing that forward?
Oh, well, I'll bring you into the process more, and I think this will answer your question. I don't totally delineate and separate composing, recording, and even mixing. So I had some of the basic tracks in my computer program, some of which I was explaining how I did it with the drummer. But what I'll do is I'll find a sound and play with it and perform it. And this is another reason why a lot of modern music sounds very computerized or the human element is lacking. There's so many choices on a computer where I can record a clean sounding electric guitar. So it almost sounds like an acoustic. There's a little bit of a different character, but there's no distortion, there's no effects, there's nothing on it. Bands do this sometimes. They'll record a clean guitar, and then digitally in the box, as they say, in the computer, they roll through all these tones, and they're like, try this tone, try this tone, try this tone. I'm a very big believer that it has to kind of be born together. My tone choices are part of my composition and writing. I don't record just any old synthesizer on MIDI, for anyone that knows what that means, or as I was explaining, a clean guitar sound, and then scroll through dozens of different sound palettes and say, well, I like these three the best. And then I'll wake up tomorrow, I'll sleep on it, and then I'll choose out of these three which I like the best after I spent the evening rolling through 200 different sound palettes or tones. No. Not at all. That's not how I do things. It has to be born in the moment together. It's got to sound right. And even the way I perform on the guitar or on the synthesizer, the tone itself, it'll subtly bring different things out of you. It has its own personality, the tone. It affects how you play the guitar. So I'll choose a tone and I'll see that it sits right in the mix. That's what makes mixing later on easier too. Because it's not like there's all these different sounds and all these different levels, and then you have to make it sound like it was done together. And before you do the mix, everything's kind of sticking out very angular and things aren't talking to each other. I combine and I streamline a lot of those processes. So I don't know if that makes sense. I know that, like, I can picture what I'm talking about. You're not a recording artist, so I know if this might sound a little I don't know what this sounds like to you. I don't know if I'm answering the question.
Well, sticking with the mixing and mastering, actually, because that was something that I'm curious about. You are having it take place during the production process, is what you're saying, right? There's
largely. I get it so that everything the tones, as I said, I don't choose tones after. I choose tones and then I perform it. I make sure it's sitting nicely with the other instruments, so it all kind of grows together. That's not to say there aren't still mixing choices that you make later on, because you still have to do certain things without getting too technical. You still have to do certain things to massage the way all the sounds work together. So just as a quick example, let's say I play bass guitar, boom, 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 a bass line on my electric bass. But let's also say I have a synthesizer line, and the synthesizer is using low tones, like wow, wong, wong. Sometimes you have to do things so that those two sounds don't step on each other's toes. Because if they're both occupying the same part of the frequency range, they stack on each other. And then the mix starts to sound what we call muddy. It's unclear. There's too much energy in those bass frequencies and not enough in the other places. Or those two bass frequencies are competing with each other. Sometimes the human voice, depending on your register, might compete with something like a guitar. You have to kind of carve out where each one is, or you won't hear the characteristics of each, and it just isn't pleasing to the human ear, and it's not going to bear well for repeat listenings. So there's absolutely still an art and a science to mixing. I just do a lot, as I was saying, Jason, it's kind of like pre-mixing. I use the recording when I'm actually tracking as pre-mixing to make sure that I'm at least at a good base camp to climb that mountain of mixing. And it makes the mixing a lot easier. It makes the choices a lot easier. And then what you're really doing is just getting things out of each other's way and making it sound as powerful and clear as it can be. So that's the mixing, the balances of the sonics and the instruments, both volume levels, as I was talking about, the frequency characteristics, and then just left, right. Some things go a little more in the right speaker, some things go a little bit more in the left speaker. That gives it a spread and more dimension to it. There's dimensions. It's kind of like painting on a canvas. You have the sides, you have the dimensions of the canvas. You also have a background and a foreground. Certain sounds are louder than others. That's one of the things I was mentioning about modern production I don't like is, again, without getting too technical, there's a fidelity to modern recordings. A lot of these pop artists that you can go listen right now on Apple Music, but it is a very much a taste thing, and probably because my ears grew up on music from a different era. But everything is very, I don't know if this makes sense to you or how familiar people are in the chat with very contemporary music that's been made in the last 10, 15 years, and it's only getting more and more the case over the last few years. Every instrument is very present. Each instrument is as present as the other, and it's mastered in a way where there's no dynamics. Everything is as loud, and they do this because they want it to be apparently loud. They do these tricks to make it sound louder than other recordings because we live in an age of no nuance, as you know. So it's become, let's just have our record sound as loud as you can, and that'll get people's attention. And yeah, it might, to the layman, when you play a classic rock song next to a modern production, the modern production, if you're sitting in your car, is going to sound a lot louder. And at first, it might, the unsubtle take, the unnuanced take to that is, oh, it's better, it's louder, it's more powerful. It's actually not the case at all. It's just that everything is as loud as the other. So it's like a painting where everything's in the foreground and nothing's in the background. There's no vanishing point. Mm-hmm. All that subtlety is lost. If you turn the Led Zeppelin record up to match the volume, there's actually way more depth and there's way more going on. And there's way more of a craft to it. So I'm a big fan of tape, tubes, analog recording, and I hope to use even more analog equipment in the future. But that's kind of a production thing as well. And then, not to get crazy with the technical stuff, I don't want to lose people, but mastering is when you have the mix, so you can't change what's left, right. You can't say, no, I want the guitar more left. That's mixing. That's done. Mm-hmm. You can't raise levels. You can't say, I want the drums louder. That's done. That's mixing. You hand a mastering engineer the song as you'd hear it, same thing, wouldn't sound too much different to you. But what a mastering engineer does is that's a whole other art and science where they run it through certain equipment and they kind of put the final sonic bow on it. So mastering generally makes it sound bigger, more powerful, more clear, fatter. It just makes it sound a little more professional. So that's besides playing drums, that's the one thing I didn't do, is that I wanted a professional to do that. So I sent it to a mastering studio and I had a mastering engineer do it to kind of blow it up, have the song sound clearer and punchier and fatter. And then it's done. That's what you hear.
Someone to Know. Why was that the first song?
It was essentially, I think we were talking a little about this at the beginning. It was, it checked the marks of my different styles, bringing together different styles, the rock element, but also the electronic element. So it was a good introduction stylistically. As I said, I wanted it to be pop format, verse, chorus, verse, be something catchy with a memorable hook. I know what you need, someone just to know that part. And the lyrics, we were talking about this, as I was saying, about empathy, being heard. I wanted something that made sense for the moment we're in late 2020. So it just all came together. And once you always have second thoughts, even when I was about to release it. Both the song itself, I was thinking, should I mix this louder, mix that softer? You're always thinking to yourself things like that. And then the song itself as a choice of first song, was this really the best one to do? Is it a little too pop? Are people going to think I'm too like bubblegum? Is it too singy-songy? But those are very, very minor questions that one has. In my case that I had, you know it in your gut. I've been doing it long enough and I know myself well enough where I knew it was the right choice. It was an intuitive choice and I'm very happy about it, that it was.
I really want to know, because you're a deep thinker and you lace in sort of a lattice work, the art, whether you, and even your commentary, your commentary, your poetry, and now your music is inescapably a lattice work that you're drawing from things that are purely intellectual, but spiritual as well as emotional. Are there any, for lack of a better word, codes or allusions to more music to come, or to other works of your art, or pieces of perhaps your spirit that you haven't entirely revealed, may reveal, may not reveal, that are in Someone to Know?
It's a loaded question. Wow, isn't it? First of all, I just want to say briefly, I'll put on my tap host hat just for 1 second. Especially because of what we're talking about tonight, and I was saying how I try to be as integrated as I can be, holistic, but like anyone, you approach different circumstances appropriate for those circumstances. So all that to say, I'm not watching the chat tonight. So if anyone has questions, if you've been adding me, I haven't been seeing it, so I apologize. But try to in the remaining time we have, direct questions to Jason, and then he can pass them along to me. The reason I'm doing that is because I'm trying to make this tonight to, again, be appropriate for the circumstance, be like Jason and I amazingly found some free time between the two of us, and we're sitting in a nice study or a cafe, and we're just having a deep talk as two friends. And as a curious friend, he's asking me about my music and how it came to be in this particular song, and to best serve that, it takes me out of that mythopoetic mind if I look at the chat too much. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to stay almost in the kind of headspace I am when I'm writing a song itself. So I'm a little more flighty and ethereal right now. It's that side of Jared. But please, having said that, direct any questions to Jason, because we would love to hear any thoughtful questions you might have. And I'm hoping to share myself as much as I can, and, in that relational regard, get to know each other more as we can through computer screens like we do here. But it is real. We have a real community here, as we often speak about. Hidden messages, codes, like I said, very interesting question. Oh.
Didn't mean to do that. Go right ahead, brother.
No, it's all right. I didn't know if it was a little quick. Hidden message yourself there. Just can't stop listening to the song, can you? Is that catchy?
No.
Surface, or at least like a simpler way to say it, is that, as I was just speaking to in that it's an introduction, that yes, very much so, there are threads or themes, both lyrically and sonically and musically, that are here that you will definitely hear in future songs as well. As I said, it had to be a bit of an introduction. So it's not like I'm going to go start making polka music after this. Like, I got that out of my system. Now I'll spend the rest of my life making polka music or classical symphonies. As I said, it'll branch out. Some songs will rock harder. Some songs will be more electronic. Some songs will be more acoustic. But there's a lot of my stylistic DNA that's in that song. So it serves in that way. Thematically, too, I think I already touched upon when I talked about what bridges music itself for me, and then the commentary or social, political, activist aspect of the Great Order as a whole. I talked about engendering more balance and harmony into the world. So you can definitely refer to that part of our discussion tonight as another way to answer the question you're asking me now, Jason. It's still woven into this. But speaking on that, but I think speaking a little more directly to your question, I'll give you this. And it's not a secret. I mentioned this to you privately, and I said, I think I'm going to tell people about this, and it has come up a bit in other conversations, is I mentioned how the guitar is tuned, in this case to lute tuning. There are other tunings I use aside from the standard guitar tuning. And again, to try to explain it as simply as I can to a non-musician, that's just when you're turning the tuning heads at the top of the guitar, and you're changing the tension of the strings. So the relationship of the strings one to the other is how the guitar is tuned. So as I said, there's a standard tuning, and there's all kinds of deviations from that, alternate tunings. And I used a lute tuning, the way lutes were tuned before we even had acoustic guitars and electric guitars for that matter. But there's a different thing going on in what the frequency base is. And what that means is, let's say you call a note A, and what is the difference between the note that we call A and the note that we call B? It's just frequencies. It's just a waveform vibrating at a certain frequency, right? Just like light is frequency, but your eyes pick it up. And there's nothing in nature that says this is A, right? It's even a little more nebulous than, at least in the light spectrum, we recognize that a certain range of frequencies contain the different shades that we call green. Mm-hmm. But there's nothing in nature, there's no referent in nature where we say this is A, this is B, this is C. Mm-hmm. Believe it or not, it's changed over time. So the way that an orchestra tunes and has tuned, certainly in our lifetimes, and it started in the mid or early part of the last century, in the 20th century, is that middle A on a piano, so a piano keyboard, a full piano is 88 keys. The most central A note is called middle A. So the reference point for what we call A is 440 hertz. That's what's been the standard, and that's what all instruments are tuned to. That's been the standard in modern times, as I said, going back to, I believe, at least the 1930s. However, there's been experimentation and different theories about using other frequency bases for that middle A, which changes literally every note that's hit is a bit of a different frequency. You'll remember, Jason, the first time we spoke to Laura Lee Scaife back in July of 2019, about a year and a half ago. Wonderful conversations we've had with her about Lord of the Rings as a meta myth for the West and relating it to what we're going through now. Very well versed in symbols, in Jungian analysis, and a very deep, regardless of what you think of this sort of thing, a very deep and intelligent investigation into astrology, not your typical back of TV, People magazine type of astrology. Obviously, Jason and I wouldn't host such a person. Jason, do you remember how she was talking a little bit about vibration? And you actually shared this as a screen share, a video where people would put sand on a surface, and then they would use a tone generator. So for anyone, I hope you can follow. I hope I'm not losing anybody here. Tone generator is just simple tones, the most basic pure tones of frequencies. So it sounds something like this. And then you turn up a knob, and as you turn it up and that frequency gets higher, it goes from lower pitches to higher pitches. Right? So something like that. Bear with me for a second, because there's a reason I'm explaining this to you. So Jason, do you remember how, very interestingly, when you put sand, just randomly pour sand onto a surface that can vibrate, and you play this frequency generator next to it loud enough so that the table vibrates at these different frequencies, the hertz of the actual waveform, that's how physics measures it, the actual waveform of the sound moving through the air, because you are literally pushing air when you're making sound. At certain key frequencies, the sand would arrange itself into geometric patterns. Do you remember that from that show?
I sure do.
Okay, cymatics. It's generally called cymatics. So the idea is that certain frequencies relate to structures of life, cellular structures, the way plants grow, the Fibonacci sequence, snowflakes, crystals, that sort of thing. And the idea is that there are certain frequencies, because of this, that are more natural, are more, I guess, laden with order, the life-giving order, the structure of what creates life. And for us people, to the human organism, it's something more germane to the liquid in our body and I know there's different theories about whether or not we radiate electromagnetic waves, and however you want to look at it, it's more germane and healthier and natural to the human organism. There's even conspiracy theories, and I know this is speculation, and I'm not saying I believe one way or the other, that the A440 I mentioned, that's been our standard tuning reference in our lifetimes and before, was actually chosen by certain people. I don't know if I believe this or not, but the theory is that it actually engenders a more anxious state of mind, and it's better for little worker ant consumers. And so there's been a pushback for alternate tuning frequency bases in music. Now, when I first heard about this, as someone interested in holistic way of being, health, spirituality, and being a musician myself, naturally, when I came across this a few years ago, before you even knew me as a great order, I was interested in this, but I wanted to test it out. So I did my own experiments, and I figured I had a synthesizer, so that's a pure tone. I put on headphones because that's intimate, and you're going to kind of hear with the synthesizer the sonics kind of circling around your head if you have headphones on. So I was able to change this synthesizer, allowed me to change the frequency base. And I experimented with this through my own experimentation, through meditating with and listening to tones that are based on these frequencies, and doing a little research too. I determined that it made sense to me to use these kind of frequencies in my songs. I'll tell you another interesting aside as well. It's one of those personal foreshadowing, your life is a movie or novel once you look back on it and you see how the pieces fit together. You'll be interested in this, Jason. One of the first places I read about cymatics and these different scales and frequency bases was on a little site that we know called Red Ice. And it was so long ago that it was before Henrik and Lana got more specifically into this political moment that we're in this defense of the West and peoples of European descent. It was more when they regularly were producing and known for what's generally thought of as alternative health, the esoteric, speculative kinds of things, alternative news. And I knew that there was something here for me. And every so often I'd check in with Red Ice, and you know this, and I've actually said this to Henrik and Lana privately when they were on tap about a year ago. And if anyone's interested, we did a great episode with Henrik and Lana. I don't know if anyone's ever done this, where it was really about them, how they met, how they formed what they do, a very personal journey about them. And I got to tell them, this is a very interesting, personally fulfilling thing for me. I got to tell them how we had a similar trajectory, because I myself was more generally in that esoteric, holistic, alternative health kind of thing. And because Henrik and Lana, or because we're the type of people who we're not afraid to follow the truth where it leads, and there's no part in our brain that says, no, back off, that's too much, that's dangerous. We have that, and we followed it through. And in our personal trajectory, where the interests we started, it led us through our inquiry, truth no matter what, of doing the work that we do now and understanding the attacks on people of European descent. And again, the political and social moment that we're in, that you and I do so much work in, Jason. So for me, you have to understand, putting this music out, it just brings together so many threads in my life, and it feels like it was all leading up to this. So it's very meaningful and very fulfilling in that regard. But specifically for this question that you're asking about, like getting more under the hood, I know to some people it's speculative. I know some people don't buy it. But again, I've done with the head and with the heart and with the intuition, the masculine and the feminine. I've done enough of my own experimentation and research into it. And again, this isn't something I happened upon 2 weeks ago. As I told you, when I was researching it, it was back when Red Ice was not even doing their pro-Western thing yet. So we're talking the better part of 10 years ago. So much younger. So this is something that I've been looking into for a long time. There are two alternate frequencies instead of using the A440. One goes a little higher, one goes a little lower. So depending on what serves the song best or where my voice sits better, when I write a song now, I experiment with which of the two I'm going to use, and then I use it. So this first song, Someone to Know, is in one of these tuning bases where the frequencies align with the kind of cymatics I talked to you about, where at certain frequencies, the sand randomly organizes itself, spontaneously organizes itself into these geometric shapes. And whether or not you buy that, I still offer it to anyone listening to understand a little bit more about where my intention is. Every layer of what I'm trying to do artistically, whether it's as far as music goes, the more literal, analytical aspect of the lyrics, or literally the tones and vibrations themselves, before we even get to the musical material of chords and the harmonic changes and the melodies and the harmonies, the actual frequencies of what you're hearing, my intention is what I offer to you. My intention is to do something that is life-affirming, life-giving, harmonious, salubrious, that's going to support us on all of our levels, mentally, spiritually, and physically, to be a complete meal, to be real. Mm-hmm. So that's why I took the time to explain that to you. And I hope it was of interest to some of you.
It was definitely an interest to me. And I think the way it looks like the our gathering, our family here, very interested in it as well. What we're going to do, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be entering now like the final 15% or so of our interview with the Great Order, Jared George, our dear brother Jared George, and we're gonna go a little bit more global here with these with the next couple of questions, and then we are going to turn to your financial gifts and any questions that you might have. Remember that you have to tag me as No White Guilt on that.
Jason, are you able to filibuster for a second? I need to go off camera just for a minute. I am in a human body. I'm a human body with all of its frailty, so I need to go off camera for a second. I'll be right back.
Please, my friend. I can filibuster away. So if you have a question or comment that you would like to make, you can do so with a financial gift on Cash App. You can also do so with a financial gift on over on Entropy, and of course those will get priority, but everyone's questions or comments are almost always answered. We usually will carry them over if we have more than that we can cover in the time we have remaining. So please do tag me as No White Guilt on that channel if you are there, or Discipline with NWG if you are there, and if you're new, then you can hop on over to Entropy, and if you write in the question widget, or the Tall Kevin widget, as we lovingly call it occasionally, you can those questions won't disappear. So you can write them in there, and you can vote on the questions as well. You can vote them up, the ones you like, or statements there, the statements that you like. It's been fascinating. I do want to give a bit of a PSA in the middle of this fascinating discussion with the Great Order, our very own Jared George. And as you can see, all of the talent and effort that he puts into and he brings to service to White Wellbeing, and living through his art and his service to our people. I do want to give in the midst of that the PSA, if you will, and that is that we are not going to be able to talk anymore about the election. And I did a roll-in going free earlier today, and I would appreciate that no one in the live chat, no one should be deleted or banned by the mods, the comments deleted. So if you make a comment about there being fraud or anything of this nature in the live chat, I would appreciate it if the moderators would just simply delete those comments and inform those individuals that it is now prohibited on YouTube and I assume very shortly on Twitter and Facebook, to make any suggestion that there was any fraud whatsoever relative to the election. So that being said, we have the Great Order back with us.
Can I just say something quickly on the occasion of taking a short break for biological reasons?
Yes.
Because we might have a few new people here, as you said, and I was just talking about the health with the frequencies. So for anyone new, I go out there, I write very intuitively, but just for whatever it means to people too, I've never done drugs. I don't drink alcohol. I don't use any substances. And you don't have to use that stuff to be creative. As much as I love music more than I can put into words, it still has to serve a higher level. My life itself is my work of art. I refuse to destroy my health and my well-being, even in the service of music. I needed to figure out how to do that without those things. That goes for relationships too. I value the people in my life, and some artists think that they need to have dramatic relationships and fights with their loved ones so that they then have material to write a song about. I don't buy into that either. My life itself is my work of art, and the music fits into that. And I know how to get creative and do all sorts of interesting things and not have it sound like your standard, as someone said to me, these aren't your bog standard chords, Jared. Like, there's interesting changes here. And how does that happen? How do you do that? How do you think outside the box? Well, you can do it if you practice and you get in touch with the good things in life and the good strands of the spirit. It's there for you. Mm-hmm. You do not need. I've never even been in an intoxicated state. I mean, alcohol's touched my lips, but I've never even been fully drunk. I have no desire. It's not in me. I always knew it was a bad idea. And my parents weren't like holy rollers about it. My dad even, you know, he wasn't a drinker either, so that was easy. But, you know, occasionally he'd enjoy like a good quality beer. We went out to dinner or something. He liked Bass Ale from England and Dinkelhocker from Germany. And those are good brews. And even when I was 8 years old, he's like, okay, you want to see what it tastes like? Taste a sip. So it wasn't this forbidden thing. It wasn't because my parents were like raising me in a commune, like sheltered from things. But I felt like that was an important thing to say too, especially for new people. Jason and I are all about health and well-being and doing it in a holistic way. And as an artist, as a musician, especially a rock musician, even more especially, I think it's important you know that. And the friends I grew up with that I talked about too a little bit, I had this great tight group of friends. None of them either. For all the creativity, all the zany projects we tried, no drugs, no intoxication. It's not necessary.
Amen to that. Thank you for saying that too. Especially our young people need to hear that. Mm-hmm. Let's ascend to the stratosphere and look down on the great.
We're not already there.
We will in this next, because we're going to be asking a global question here, and that is influences. Mm-hmm. And who has inspired you, your music, this part of you, your music, and what sort of influences can we see in your music, this piece and pieces to come, harmonic vocabulary, and in the pieces to come?
Well, that's an interesting question, especially on the heels of what I just said. Again, we could have a whole other conversation about this. I don't know how much more time we have. I obviously have a lot of, like any musician, there's literally something in any genre that I can get into. I'm sure there's a song or two in any genre that I can appreciate that can mean something to me. And even, I was talking about the openness thing before, even stuff you don't like, sometimes you listen to it and you're like, well, why don't I like this? Or how did they do it? Again, that's that artist mind openness. But your influences, of course, are what you love and what you live with and what seeps into your bones and seeps into your soul. And so while there's maybe secondary and tertiary music that I can think back to that was also formative or I enjoyed and it plays into some of my points of reference, there's clearly for me, there's one general genre, still a wide genre that implies a lot of different things, but one general genre and one general period that is my evergreen. It's my touch point. It might not surprise people who have known me a little bit or heard me talking already. And that would be what is generally called classic rock, the rock music generally of the 60s and 70s from Great Britain and the United States. And a lot of it band-oriented music and album-oriented music. So you might think of bands like Led Zeppelin, Queen, Rolling Stones, the Beatles, David Bowie, The Who, all that stuff. So that is really my stock in trade. Now, again, I don't know if we have tons of time to get into this. If you're interested in this subject, again, this is all archived on my website, and I started a new category called music interviews, specifically for when I do appearances like this where the focus is about my music. When I was on with Jody Kay yesterday, if you want to get deep into this, and we don't get to all of it now, but if this means something to you, I really, really, really recommend you listen to that episode that I did with Jody Kay, because like me, even though some of the artists she likes are a little different, she tends a little more in the folk direction, singer-songwriter direction. I tend more in the rock band direction. Jody and I both feel like this is not just music we like. There's something deeper going on there. I would look at images from the 60s and 70s, Jason, when I was a kid, and feel like it was more familiar to me sometimes than the life that was around me now. It felt like I was there, and that raises all kinds of interesting questions I know we can speculate about, but Jody feels the same way. So we were able to go very, very deeply into this. But what I will say is this, and you know this is something I feel very strongly about, and it's something that I took time to explicate in my rock and roll and the European soul article. So again, if this is kind of striking people or raising some questions or raising some eyebrows and you're curious for more, you can find that on my site. It's been published in a few different places like Countercurrents, more recently Scum Media. I talk about this to some degree in Rock and Roll and the European Soul. So I know, you don't have to tell me, I know that there are a lot of issues and poison seeds that were woven into that era. And I know that on a social level, a lot of the stuff that we're dealing with now, we can trace at least recent roots back to some of the social changes that were going on during this era. However, I can't unlike the music I grew up with and that I fell in love with. But it's beyond that. I don't think it's just a personal thing like, well, I like it, it's kind of burned into me, I can't unlike it, so that's that. No. It goes a lot deeper still than that. I believe that music, for all of the other accoutrement that were negative around it and some of the things that were promoted, like too much drug culture. So I'm glad I said what I said a moment ago, Jason, about the fact that I've never done drugs or drank. Promiscuity and things, all kinds of things kind of went along with this era. However, I think that the seeds of it, there are kernels in it and strands of energy literally encoded in that music that do contain and represent very viable strands of our Western instincts. And the basic way to say it is that every few generations or every few decades, things cycle, you understand how things cycle, that there's a crop of more romantic artists. And I feel like the rock and roll of that era was a more modern, recent iteration of what you might have found in the 1800s romantic poets who celebrated nature. So that's an element of it. I think that this is a taste thing, and I know it's you can't convince someone to like what you like just because you're explaining it. This isn't something that can be explained rationally. But for me, taste-wise, people would try to get me into more recent bands from more recent decades who were influenced by these bands. So I love Led Zeppelin, and they might say, well, Stone Temple Pilots and Soundgarden, they were influenced by Led Zeppelin, so check them out, Jared. So I would go and check them out, and they're more recent. And to me, they're good. They have some cool songs. They can play their instruments, but it's still music. When I hear bands like Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd, again, I know this is very subjective. I can't make you feel this way. I feel like there's something else going on there. There's a deeper level there. There's something else going on there to me. Not only is the music good, but I feel like the other side of the veil is trying to say something to you when you hear that music, or there's a cosmic message from space. I literally feel like there's something beyond, not the words, just the sounds and the tones and everything together. And those records contain our biospirit, also contain like secrets of the universe that can't be put into words. I don't get there with bands like Soundgarden and STP, Stone Temple Pilots. I think they're great bands. I think there's some good bands who are carrying on the flame the best they can. I like Foo Fighters, Dave Grohl. I like Queens of the Stone Age. So, I'm sure there are small bands that are chugging along whose names I don't know, and I give kudos to them for trying to continue that thing. But for whatever reason, for whatever confluence of factors in that era, whatever was going on in the ether, there was something they were tapping into. Maybe because, yes, it was a business, and there's always going to be greedy businessmen, but it was, when you read about it, it was less of a business then. There were record labels that did develop artists that understood you might not have a hit on your first album. They developed talent. Sometimes you had major artists didn't have their breakthrough till their third or fourth album. You can't, that's impossible now with major labels. And everything's owned by the same, as you know, the same 5 companies. So there was a little less of that too, so that plays into it. And you have people say things like the hippie movement was a psyop. And I know I've heard about this stuff about how acid was given out. And I don't doubt that there could have been, nefarious agencies and people and academia and media and government branches that were experimenting with social changes and mass media. And they were interested in how mass music with radio and then recorded music could affect people. I don't doubt that. I don't turn a blind eye to that. But I do have to tell people, you have to remember that these things don't come out of nowhere. Our people may have been manipulated, but we still have to have a certain instinct and liking for this kind of thing to begin with. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you a brief example. You talk about the hippies. I could turn back the clock 120, 130 years. We can go back to 1900, 1890s. And there were movements in Germany about organic food, about doing cleanses, about fasting, about walking around in the forest nude and letting the whole biosphere there, not biospirit in that case, but biosphere enter your skin, and natural ways of living. So we had people, in that case in Germany, and I'm sure there's different expressions in different European lands, who had that yearning. And the way Jody put it when we spoke last night is that why did this happen even more so in the 60s, in the more technological era, in this latter half of the 20th century, is because somewhere our people sensed we're not free. Mm-hmm. And again, maybe it was usurped. It was usurped and it was twisted against us. And there were a lot of poison things that were woven into it. But the basic core instinct to do something that is natural and free, and our drive for freedom, even though you can get off the rails with that, we know everything has to be balanced. It's there. And you know me, Jason, I'm not the type of guy that's going to say, well, let's just stamp it out. I'd rather say, let's understand ourselves fully. Let's understand ourselves better. We can therefore understand how we were manipulated to begin with. Mm-hmm. And we can also understand how to use these instincts now in a better way. So when people like Jody and I feel like we were there, and it's way more than just you love that music, there's something deeper going on. You feel a recognition. You feel like you were born in the wrong era. As she and I both, we talked about this. We both felt that we were when we were younger, but now we realize we're born at the exact right time. Because I do believe that we're at the other end of something of a wormhole that was started, not entirely started, but really came full bloom and got into public consciousness through mass media in the 1960s. And then it's up to people like us now, who are the culture creators now, mm-hmm. to take that raw material as our clay and some of these Western romantic instincts we have, because I represent, Jody represents, some of us represent that romantic poet, that bard, and that's the way it expressed in the 60s. So we recognized our archetype in the 1960s and 1970s in those movements. Well, now, guess what? We're at a higher point on the spiral, and it's up to people like us to take those instincts, but do something better with it, do something healthier with it. Mm. So like I said, I can show you how I can go out there and I can intuit certain things. And I write music in a very intuitive way. And even Laura Lee will tell you, ancestral, connecting to the ancestral spirit, but do it in a healthier way, and do it in a way where I can get up here and say, it's not through drugs. And it doesn't come across as this lame after school, don't do drugs, kids message. It's just, no, we're being adults about it. And we see that it's destroyed lives, and right. there's no reason to glorify it anymore. And I want to be an example of someone who can write music that doesn't sound like it's elevator music, that is, weird music sometimes, but I can get up here and say, I'm not someone that does drugs, or I'm someone who, I have that outward looking artist's kind of mind, but I can fly out there because I have an anchor, because I know who I am and I know where I come from. And I can also robustly advocate for my people and my heritage. These two things, we're told that artists can't do both. That's BS. These things are not mutually exclusive. It's because I have a good anchor, it's because I have a stable foundation, that I'm able to go out there and explore things, but not lose myself in the madness or get into drugs and things like that. So there's a lot to this, but that's the quickest way I could kind of give you a very under the hood way of how, that music means a lot to me. And that's the clay I have to work with. I fell in love with that music, and it was played for me when I was a kid, but I think part of it's a makeup thing too. I mean, my dad and my mom played that music for my brother too, and my brother likes it, but he doesn't love it. the way that I do. I think that if my parents played polka music growing up, I would have found Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd and The Who. I just think it's part of who I am. I think there are frequencies and messages in that music that just, like a tuning fork, I'm just tuned into that. And you can't unlike that. And so that's, I think, is the more clear-eyed, mature way to say it, is not to stamp it out, not to suppress it, not to say, oh no, that's forbidden, I can't do that, but to look at it squarely in the face and say, I'm going to alchemically better that. I'm going to take that tradition. I'm going to be a 2020 version of a bard, of a troubadour, because this goes even further back than the German movement I mentioned. As I said, we can trace it back to the medieval times, always. I'm sure things that are in our recorded history. I'm representing, like you're representing, Jason, in your own ways, like we're all representing the different particular archetypes of, we have the general Western spirit, but then we're all kind of like mixing. I was saying before, we're all, my knobs are turned differently than your knobs are, and we all, but we're still kind of archetypes. Like I still represent a certain Western archetype, like a nature, minstrel, and you represent something, and we're all, it doesn't make you less of what you are. I don't say it in a way where you diffuse and you lose your personality and you lose the individuality of your life, nothing of the sort, but it's another deeper way to understand yourself and the role you're playing in the world. And with that firm base to stand upon, you look out and you say, okay, how can we alchemically use the nonsense and the ugliness and the lies and the terrible things going on now, and from that place of very deep self-knowledge and very deep calling of destiny and knowing who you are and the role you are to play in this world, and saying you're going to do it through your speech, through your language, and the books you write, and you as a bastion, as a community leader that people focus around. And people like Jody and I might do it in a more of a bard troubadour way, but what we're doing is we're alchemists. We're taking the lead and we're turning it into gold. You have to understand who you are to do that. When you have that sense of destiny, you can take things that have poisonous elements, like these nefarious elements of the 60s and 70s culture, but you put it through the filter of your own intention, and you come out with something better. Like I said, I can't unlike that music. That's the raw material that I have to play with. And my music wouldn't be good if I tried to deny that part of myself. If I tried to make it sound totally like it was written on a lute in 1650, and I totally tried to deny the classic rock elements, I'd be suppressing a part of myself. And I don't think that it would work that way. So it takes a lot of self-exploration to get to a place like that. So I don't know if that's what you were expecting, but that's a little bit on influences.
Well, it was, and I think like the light on the lighthouse rotates 180 degrees, we'll turn around and ask about your vision for your music moving forward. What do you see, and where would you like to go? What will you share with us here today?
There's always an interplay between, as I said before, intention, but also being open to surprises. So it's not like I have every day of the next 10 years planned out. Everything that I just said, Jason, is basically the intention behind what I do. And then from this point, it's just living it out. Everything works together symbiotically. Again, that's another reason why health is important. As a singer, especially, partially one of my instruments is my body itself. So not only as a creative, like the songwriting, you want to be a vessel for that, but there's a performance aspect as well. There's almost an athletic aspect where you want your body to be tuned, again, both as the receptor creator thing when you're writing the song, but then the person that's delivering it. So health works with that. All of these things are like legs of a stool that support one another. So that's why we talk about eating well and exercising and all these things, and keeping a good mindset and having the right relationships. I want to do this for a long time. I love music, and now, as I said with the Red Ice thing before, there's just this tremendous sense of it's all been, for me, leading to this. And there's, when you're a musician, you can't be too tight. I can't sit down and say, I have to write a song about this, but I still have an entry point and I have a context. I have a community. I have something that I know, people that are receiving it, and a mission in the world, and a morality and aesthetic sense, and everything that we talk about and everything that we're trying to correct and bring about a better tomorrow in the West. That's all there. So it's not like I have to be super conscious about it all the time. It's already in my DNA and it's in my subconscious. So within that base, I can play. And when I'm alone writing a song, I can still kind of let the muse go where it goes, because I trust I'm in touch with the right spirit. And I also trust that when it's time for the editing part, for the more rational brain to come in, that I have these parameters as well and these intentions. So everything that I've spoken about tonight, Jason, is essentially the spirit of who I am and what is going to continue with music. And I hope, even though as we sit here in late 2020, especially with what we do and what we're known for, touring and playing venues publicly, I don't know if that's going to happen in 6 months from now, but I essentially have every intention of living a life as a musician and a recording artist in all the different ways that one would. So, as you know, for the time being, at least, I'm putting out a song a month. I'll build up a body of work. Maybe sometimes songs will be packaged, a few together, maybe even enough to call it an album. There's no rules. I'm not setting anything for myself. So there'll be a body of recorded work. There'll be performances. Obviously, in the context we're in, it makes sense to do like stream performances. But everything a recording artist does, write, record, perform original music, I'll be doing. And it'll be my main thing. But it's still in this context of everything else that we do together and separately, and everything I'm known for with the Great Order. It's culture creation. And this is, seizing the moment you were born into. This is what I'm here to do. So you can just expect more of the same. And as I said, you have to dance between the intention and the mystery. So I do things now, and I have like the key on the back of the little toy doll. Like, I'm wound up now. Nothing's gone on in my life. I've been doing this thing with the Great Order for 3 years. I'm clear about the moment we're in the West and my work there. My past creative life, it's all come together through this nexus point. So I have all of this wind at my back. So I know my intentions, and I know I have my practices and my disciplines about practicing my craft. And there's still a hell of a lot more to do with that. I can see how I want to improve my voice. As I told you, exercise, stretching, eating properly, everything in my life, all these things reinforce one another. So I'm setting up my life as best I can to be able to do this for a very long time. And yet there's also a mystery, because who knows what next year will bring, what 5 years from now will bring. You always have to dance with that. You always have to play with that. Anyone, but especially now, in creative life, you don't know what's going to take shape. And I told you the kind of music that I love, but I like trying things and having fun. And I'd love to do something totally different one day. Maybe do a big band song, do a song my voice serves it well, like a Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra type song. So there's all kinds of fun variations you can have too. And I think we live in a time when people are ready for that. I think people just want to see us creative people have fun. That's the thing about releasing one song at a time. Sometimes you could do a one-off and it's just a fun experiment. So who knows what kind of surprises there will be. But everything I've spoken to you about tonight, everything that you know about me as your friend, as a man, as a fellow in this, I don't think that anything I'm saying tonight, for anyone who's listened to our show or has been aware of me for some time, I'm sure none of it's surprising. There's no secret twist now. All of this is, I think, what you would expect me to be intending in my music and my creative life. It's just now, it's full. It's finally that I have the music there. I know it's just one song, but just the fact that it's out and I'm publicly here now as a musician. Hello, I've introduced myself as a musician. You could tell with everything we've talked about tonight how it brought everything together. I was like, I can't not bring music into this. It's who I am, and so it completes it. The puzzle is complete now, and now I just do what I can to have as many years as I'm given on this earth, to engender as much beauty and harmony and help people and do this together as I can.
That's magnificent, brother. Well, definitely, folks, the tap has been wide open tonight, but we're getting
Wide
ready.
open.
It's been wide open, but we're getting ready here to tap out. So let's jump on over to entropy and see what we have over here. Very early in the show tonight, we had the great Richard Wagner, who made an original piece just the other day, released as a gift to me and the work that we're doing here at Service of White Wellbeing. And he today has a $5 financial gift. And yeah, Jared, you'll have to hear that because it's really ethereal. It sounds like it came from our greats of yore. $5, Richard Wagner writes here, you and Jared George are an inspiration to all men. Well, thank you very much for that.
Thank you. It's an inspiration to be part of all this with everyone.
I couldn't agree more. And our dear sister here, fielding an entire baseball team with her own children, Mrs. Jess Horst, financially gifting $20 over here on Entropy. Thank you, dear lady. She writes, the song moves my soul. The music moves my body, thinking about lyrics, and it does resonate with me that are in it together. For our folks, not just 2020, but the collective one people, many nations. Very well written. And
that's quite a statement. Wow, thank you.
It is quite a statement on Mr. George and his music. Thank you, Mrs. Jess Horst. We have JK160 financially gifting $5. Thank you, dear brother. And he writes, thanks for the great song, exclamation point. Please keep making more. I don't think you're going to be able to stop Mr. George at this point.
The tap is open, but thank you.
The tap is wide open for Mr. George. Over here we have on the Cash App, we have Art Acrobats, one of our great participants, financially gifting $8.14. He writes here, Nancy Pelosi is not someone to know. I agree. She's not someone you want to know.
I can assure you it was not written about Nancy Pelosi.
Definitely not.
I wish her well. I wish her well. I hope that she heals in herself whatever she needs to heal.
Amen to that. It would be, pardon me, a very different song if it were written about Nancy Pelosi. Let's see. This is by
not quite my muse. Not quite my muse.
This we have here. This is great from the Whites of the Round Table. Whites of the Round Table.
I know.
Yes, financially gifting $20. Thank you so very much for that. And writes here, great work, TGO. Creating WPO's culture is paramount. White positive culture is paramount. Indeed. Thank you very much. Great words, a poignant statement, and $20 financial gift. Thank you so very much. And we also have over here the one and only Slots. Thank you, brother. Financially gifting $5. A great participant and activist for White Wellbeing, writing here, Jared's insight is key to connecting with 60s peeps. So I guess 60s meaning people from the 60s. I'm not exactly.
Maybe both people like me who like it, or people who people that grew up in that era. Let's take it as both. We'll take it as both.
That makes sense. That makes sense. The conduit. Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great statement there, Slots. Thank you very much for that. And the $5 financial gift. And we will swivel back around here for the questions widget or statements widget. And we have Greek America writing No White Guilt. Thank you for the great order. Thank you for the song, brother. This will really help our well-being. Yes, indeed. It will, and it is stuck in my head, so it plays constantly. whether it's actually playing somewhere.
I hope you like it. I hope you like it.
Yes, I do. It's rarely do I like an earworm, but this one absolutely. It'd stick around all day long. We have Celtic couple asking, is Jason or Jared Irish? Jared?
I don't talk too much about personal stuff, even in that regard, but I will say, because people think of the red hair, in the recent heritage that I know of, the family history that I know of, the red hair is actually from middle of Europe. So there were Celtic tribes in the middle of Europe, and of course Germanic tribes. And red hair was bigger in Germany, or Germanic peoples, I should say, generally, than a lot of us think. I know that today the abundance of redheads are found in Ireland and Scotland, a little bit on the western coast of Norway, which makes sense because it's across from Scotland. But as far as I know, the red hair, and it's, I have red and blonde, both sides of the family. It could well be the continental Celtic tribes, and or Germanic, kind of in the middle of Europe. But I don't have, people think that I do. As far as I know, I don't have recent relatives I can trace back to Ireland.
I will just throw in, I've said this before, I have all of Europe and Russia in my genetic heritage, so Irish is there as well. We have Kimberly asking, Mr. George, when is his next song coming out? And that would be Far Away, which was a TAP exclusive.
Yes, it's called Far Away, yeah.
When will hard copies like CDs, or will hard copies like CDs ever be available? So 2 questions in one there.
I think there could be a lot of interesting things to do with packaging physical products. So obviously to get this launch out, I wasn't thinking in that direction. But as I said towards the end, when Jason asked me about my intention, I'm a musician and I'm going to be doing this for the rest of my life. So I'm sure there'll be occasion for all kinds of different ways to package and release things. And then eventually that'll take tangible physical forms as well. And then, the next song, Far Away, hopefully, I want it out in this time of December. So hopefully within the next couple of weeks, depending on how things go. Definitely follow my site, mailing list. I have my own mailing list on my site. And I guess what I'll do with my mailing list is just I'll send out a mailing every time I release a song, and follow social media. I'm sure Jason here will repost things too, so you'll hear about it. But it'll be within the next few weeks around our holiday time.
Fantastic, brother. Well, it has been a absolute bliss. It has been a great joy to be able to interview you again, sort of stepping into the time machine, heading back to the very beginning, and those first couple of conversations where I interviewed you on some of your deep wisdom that you were sharing on your channel at that time. To be able to step back into that role today for me has been, especially since it is relative to your music and this great talent that you have, has been really magical for me, and I couldn't have enjoyed myself more. Will you please tell all of these folks who might be new, a lot watching live or watching in replay, where they can find you, and the kind of things you work on, and when you will be distributing or posting another show or blog or article or anything of that nature? And finally, brother, your final thoughts for today's TAP episode.
Well, first, I would simply like to thank you, too, for giving me the space to do this and get into, as I said, a bit of a different state than I normally am on TAP. I tried to kind of conjure up the headspace I'm in when I write a song. So sometimes it's very, very hard to talk about these ethereal, personal things and articulate them in language and have them be something that other people can follow. I think we did a good job of that today, and a lot of that's down to your questions and keeping me on track. So I thank you for the generosity of time you've provided here and some of your questions. I was holding off on doing live streams for a while, and I denied some requests for many months in 2020 because I wanted there to be a flurry of activity when the song came out, and to pivot, because I understand I was seen as like commentator guy, live stream guy, and there's a pivot to people seeing you as an artist. Once people think of you as one way, they kind of categorize you, and I can understand that there's a bit of a curve to that. So far, so good. I think most people are getting it, and the transition's been smooth. And all that to say, I've done a bunch of live streams recently. So if you were interested in what you heard today, or you're into this kind of music, or you're creative yourself, you'll see on my site, I've done several other interviews over the past week where they're all different. Some of the things, obviously, some things come up are similar. But there's a lot of interesting things that have been done. I'm hoping to have some time to choose some juicy clips, like from our tap tonight and from some other shows, to give people a little more digestible tidbits of a few minutes. But I'm working on this next song, Far Away, like I said. I'm sure some other streams will come up. There's nothing exactly on the calendar. I often do Learning in Public with John Bruce Leonard from Arctos as well, but we don't have a next episode booked. So I would just tell you to go to my site, thegreatorder.com. I'm easy. You can just remember one thing. You know how to spell it, thegreatorder.com. My website is a catalog of everything that I do, so you can peruse all the different things that I do. Or you could go to the why. If you go to the menu and you go to the page called The Why, you can get a little bit more about what I am and what I do. And there's a few different ways I approach that. And of course, Jason and I, you can get to this from my site as well, but we have a shared site called theafterparty.tv where these streams and related streams are cataloged as well. So that is, I feel like I'm forgetting something, but that's that. I do have to, I'm glad there's not too many things scheduled in the coming days, because speaking of that last question, I do need to finish this song Far Away and get it all done and dusted. But social media, all my links are on thegreatorder.com. I do recommend that you sign up to the mailing lists too on the sites Jason and I have, because we have way more control over our sites than we do on social media. But I'm on Telegram and Twitter and Instagram and all those things. And I try to it's not just updates. I try to share aesthetics, beautiful things. I try to share other people's art, or these little artistic memes I make with little bits of posy fragments I have that weren't in poems, but I put them with images and give you something to think about. Because even the internet can be beautiful, guys. We have to create beauty wherever we go. And even the internet doesn't have to be throwaway culture. We can do some interesting things with the internet and have fun with the day and age we live in, be alchemists like we were talking about earlier. So that's me. And Jason, again, thank you. It was a tremendous pleasure for me. And I've done it to you, and picked your brain about your writing process. I definitely recommend anyone that wants to get to know Jason better to go look through our archives on our sites of when he spoke about writing Crucible or writing Prometheus Rising. We spoke about Prometheus Rising back in May, or Born Guilty when it was in a companion volume in one book back in December of 2018. I did an episode where I asked Jason all about that big book, Born Guilty, and we really get into some interesting things about Jason's writing process and all the things that go on there. But yeah, Jason, it's an honor and a pleasure to do all of this with you. I hope that it was useful and not just solipsistic for me to talk about my music. I hope it was still something that people can glean from and reach out to me if you have any questions or this sparks any thoughts or inspirations. But other than that, I hand it back to you. Everyone else, love and best to you until next time.
Well, that was absolutely magnificent. It was the entirety of the interview was splendid. I think it served on many different levels. I think people are going to be walking away. I know people are going to be walking away from this knowing a lot more and empowered by a lot more of the information that you shared, the knowledge, and also intrigued. They're going to want to dig more. They're going to want to know more. And who knows, maybe some people get off onto some paths, some musical paths or artistic paths of various types of their own based on the things you shared here today. So who knows what will come of this.
Yeah. I'll tell you one thing in a music's life that's like the crown achievement is a kid walks up to you one day and says, I started writing songs or playing guitar because of you. That'll be if I experience that moment, that'll be a pretty heavy moment. That, musicians, that's kind of like a milestone,
Oh, I could only imagine. That would be amazing. Yeah. And I don't doubt that's coming for you, brother. And we're looking forward to Far Away and many more of the pieces that you will be making over the months to come. And remember, folks, there is no support shaming. Where you can gift financially. And if you are totally unable to gift something financially, then always a good word and a bit of praise, even if the type of music or art that is being produced is not necessarily your cup
and
of
share
tea.
it. If I could like to share it, I'd like this to be everywhere, not just the States, Europe, Australia, all around our Western world.
Yes.
Maybe you don't love it. Like Frody, our friend, he's into black metal. I knew he wasn't going to love someone to know. I would have thought it was a little fake if he came back gushing. But I got into Frody, and, you know, you're able to have a man-to-man and say, I know this isn't your kind of music, but if you know people in Europe that might love it, pass it along. And he was like, absolutely, man. You know, it's the support. And he'll say things like, yeah, this is my main music. He's in a very like heavy black metal. But he's like, you know, I've still heard enough of this kind of music where I can tell it's well crafted. I can tell you know what you're doing. And so, you know, that's a genuine kind of interaction and genuine kind of thing. I wouldn't want someone into black metal being like, oh my God, Jared, this is the most amazing thing I've ever heard. Because you know that they're just telling you what they think you want to hear. But it's honest feedback. But whether you're a Frody type who it's not your thing, but you know people that might like it, or if you love it and you want to share it with people, sharing it, please share it. We're creating a new culture here. We don't have an apparatus behind us like Hollywood. We're doing this grassroots, but we really believe in it. And like Jason said, there is support, financial support. If you go to my music page and you scroll down, there's a few different ways to do it. I offer it, download, stream. It's all free. I have to give you something that's high enough quality where if it affects you, I trust that it comes back to me. Some people have. I have people paying for that one song more than you would pay for an album. In some cases, a lot more than you'd pay for an album. So I'm very, very grateful for those of you who know who you are, who've already given extraordinary contributions, and it goes a long way. So thank you.
Yeah, indeed. I second that. Let me say a big thank you to everyone who was here today, everybody who financially gifted, everybody who participated in the live chats, the various live chats on the various platforms. It is a great honor to be able to serve White Wellbeing with you all and to have you here for this in-depth conversation of the artist Jared George as the Great Order. I also want to say a big thank you to First Last, who is a great musician, and he helped me. I reached out to him with some questions about how to really conduct a quality interview of a musician.
Oh, wow.
And he was very kind and helped me with some questions.
This is how meticulous Jason is, ladies and gentlemen. This is a hardworking man, and he sets a high standard. I love that about you, Jason. Thank you so much.
Well, you're most welcome. And First Last wanted to make sure that I and everyone knew that if it didn't end up being a good interview, it's because I'm lousy at it. So he had supplied me with some great insight on how to interview a musician. And so deep thank you to First Last. And next to last, I like that little segue, we will thank Ulrach, who just financially gifted, he says, in the name of Don Lemon and the other kind of folks at CNN, $50. So thank you so very much for that, Ulrach, and all the rest of you. It's a great service, as I say. It's a great honor to serve with you all in White Wellbeing. And I don't know about you all, but for the next couple of months, I am going to be searching for the lost tapes of Iron Cobra. It's been splendid, ladies and gentlemen, and we look forward to seeing you all again next time.
We seem more a solid thing, promising all well. When youth was first blossoming, ringing as a bell. All the searching in your heart, something in the swell. Wonder if it ever will mean something to tell. I know what you need, someone just to know.